IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It is Tuesday, March 19th, which means we are a day away from practice number 2 for Notre Dame this spring. I'm excited about it. We're only going to get 5 periods tomorrow, but we're still going to be there, and that's a lot better than not being there at all, I would say. So there's no doubt about that. Got a lot to talk about today, a lot going on. Ryan and Sean did a great job yesterday talking about the pot of gold situation and everything that was going on there. We're going to have some content at Irish Breakdown about that. Obviously, I'm going to come up this week with a sort of my breakdown of the quarterbacks and some other top players. So a lot of recruiting going on. Also started a video series last night that's going to break down Mike Denbrock's offense. And last night was just a little snippet of what's to come. Broke down a sequence of events that happened in the Notre Dame game against Cincinnati 3 years ago. That just is just evidence of why I'm a big Mike Denbrock guy and why I have been really since he was at Notre Dame in 2015. It's about the feel for the game. To either tonight or tomorrow morning, I'm working on it. Just depends on when it's done. I'll have another breakdown of Mike Denbrock's offense. It's going to be about a 4 or 5 part series, most likely. Going to break down formations personnel, going to break down how he uses motion, going to break down the run game, going to break down a few aspects of the pass game. So a lot of fun stuff. And it's message board. It's premium members only stuff. You're going to want to check that out. The people that are in the chat that are on the board will tell you that, you know, that's stuff that you're definitely going to want to check out. So you're going to want to see that last night or see what I put up last night. It's still on there, obviously, today. Today, however, in today's show, we're going to talk about Notre Dame and spring ball and kind of just some different aspects that need to be a focus for Notre Dame. We'll talk offensively, really about the issues, the top issues that need to be addressed for Notre Dame this spring, things that are going to help you kind of go into the offseason feeling, hey, you've got a chance to be pretty good this year. Going to talk about what I think the focus needs to be on defense as we kind of kick spring back up. And then finally, we're going to talk about the ACC, its potential demise, and what it means for Notre Dame. There's a lot of stuff going out there. There's a lot of assumptions being made that I just think are very faulty. We'll address those again. And my reminder to Notre Dame fans is stop listening to the media when they tell you what Notre Dame is going to have to do, because they've been doing this my entire life, and it's never been true, and it's not now. So we'll dive into that at the end of the show. That'll be part 3 of today's show. Let's get into part 1 of today's show. And you know, this really looks at the Notre Dame offense. And obviously Mike Denbrock was hired to do a certain thing, and Mike Brown, and you've got Riley Leonard coming in as a transfer. You've got Chris Mitchell, Jaden Harrison, who are already in. You're going to have Bo Collins coming in this summer. You've got some talented freshmen that are on campus, some young. There's a lot of fun storylines. But I'm going to look a little bit today about what are the priorities for Notre Dame. What are the things that can and must be at the top of address these questions or problems at the top of the board? And it's not going to be anything statistical. You've got to average this many yards. You've got to average this many yards per play. It's all about sort of the makeup of your team and what your team needs to be. And that to me is really where, you know, when I watch practice, it's yes, I'm going to be watching Riley Leonard. Yes, I'm going to be watching the running backs. Yes, I'm going to be watching the receivers and the offensive line. And those individual storylines, those individual performances are always fun to watch. They're important. You know, guys stepping up is certainly an important part of this team developing and growing. And so we'll look at those. But as a coach, it's not so much about, okay, is Riley Leonard as good as I hope he's going to be? It's not so much about, okay, is Charles Jagasaw as good as I hope he's going to be? Or Chris Mitchell or Cam Williams or Jaden Greathouse or Jeremiah Love or Jadarian Price or Billy Shrout or, you know, name any player. It's about, as a coach, what kind of unit am I building? What's our character? What's our culture? What are the things that we focus on schematically? What's going to define us as a program? What's going to allow us to go out there in the fall and compete against the best teams on the schedule? Because if it's a statistical conversation, then you know, look, Jared Parker should have been up for, you know, coordinator of the year last year. When you look at Notre Dame's production last year, the production was excellent. Notre Dame ranked 7th in the country, 6th amongst Power 5 teams last year in scoring. Notre Dame last season in total offense and yards per play last season ranked 9th in yards per play at 6.95. It's the second best season they've had since World War II ended in yards per play, behind only Mike Denbrock's 2015 team. There are a lot of things that you look at Notre Dame and say statistically it looked good. But what we can all agree on is that it wasn't good enough because they didn't do it when it mattered most. They relied on talent, playing some teams that weren't very good, and really just dominating against inferior opponents. For Mike Denbrock, it's not going to be about, can he match the statistics that he had last year at LSU? No, he's not. And I don't care that he does. It's about, are you developing a culture on offense that says, hey, we can go out there and handle our business against the teams that we're supposed to beat, number one, which Notre Dame did last year. But also, we're going to go out there against the best teams in the schedule, and we're going to handle business and make sure that this side of the ball gives us a chance to win every single one of those games. And then, of course, Al Golden's going to have to do the same thing on his side of the ball, and then Marty Biagi's going to have to do the same thing on special teams. And that's really what it gets down to. It's not so much about, what's our favorite scheme? We're going to run inside zone or duo, or are we going to run man scheme or gap scheme, or are we going to be a team that's horizontal spread on pass game, vertical spread on pass game? Are we an air raid team? Are we a pro style team? That stuff is all window dressing to a degree. You can have, and here's what I mean. You can have all those things. You can have the best scheme in the world and be the smartest coach in the world. But if your core is not strong, you're going to put up points. You're going to be impressive. People are going to like to watch you. But when it comes to, championship Monday, you're going to be sitting at home watching it with us as fans, as a team. And so that's kind of the focus that I'm going to get on today, is just about the specific aspects of the team that need to really be focused on and built up this spring, and why and how they matter. And that's what we're going to dive into. To begin, I think when you're Notre Dame, it has to start up front. There's no position in my view that is more important to Notre Dame's success this spring than the emergence of the offensive line. There isn't one. And when you talk about what this team is, and when we talk about the talent, and you start getting excited about some of it, there's Charles Jagasol, there's Billy Shrout, there's Ashton Craig. You've got young, talented guys like Sullivan Absher and Sam Pendleton and Emil Wagner, and Gary Lambert's going to show up in the fall. But more so looking at the spring, there's a lot of names. There's a lot of formerly highly ranked recruits. There's a lot of that type of talent in the room. But that doesn't matter. It's about what kind of line you have, and what kind of line is Notre Dame going to be building. And to me, when you look back at last year, the fact of the matter is they weren't a very good offensive line last year in relation to playing at the level of the standard that is Notre Dame football. And they had some big moments. They had some numbers. Things look good here. Yards per carry this and yards per play that. But at the end of the day, in the biggest moments, the offensive line didn't get it done. And even in games where they played well as a unit for most of the game, like Ohio State, I thought it was one of the better performances the offensive line had. When the game was on the line, they didn't get it done. Whether it's third and short, fourth and short, fourth quarter, putting the game away. And then you looked at games like Duke, they got their butts kicked. They got their butts kicked against Louisville. They got their butts kicked against Clemson. And you really just didn't have the kind of play up front that you needed. Despite having two veterans at tackle, a veteran at center, you were younger at guard. You didn't have a lot of experience at guard. And, but it wasn't just that. Blake Fisher regressed, in my opinion. Zeke Correll regressed, in my opinion. Just overall, you didn't have the type of line you needed. And it wasn't because they, pulled too much. That's a schematic issue that I had, and a conversation we can have about, are they playing to the talent of the players? Okay, that's a different conversation. But even within that, even if you're making calls that I don't think necessarily fit the style of your players, the fact is this line didn't play like a Notre Dame line is supposed to play. And that to me is where this comes about, because the big fear I have with the line is it's youth. And it's not just youth from a class standpoint. It's a youth from a lack of experience standpoint. You go into next season and your most experienced offensive lineman from a snaps and start standpoint is Pat Coogan, who's a one-year starter. He had 13 career snaps, hardly played before last season. You look at Rocco Spindler as your number 2 most experienced offensive lineman. He had 10 snaps last season. Or 10, excuse me, 10, he had a little bit more than 10 snaps. He had 10 starts last season. And you look at these guys and you're like, hey man, that's just not a lot of experience. You don't have a single offensive lineman with over 1,000 career snaps under his belt like you did last season. You had multiple. And prior to last season, Pat Coogan had played 3 snaps in his career. Rocco Spindler had played 19 snaps in his career. So your 2 guards had played a total of 22 snaps. Well, going into this season, you don't have the overall experience of like a Joe Alt, a Blake Fisher, who had 20 plus career consecutive starts under their belt. You don't have, Zeke Correll, who had, what was it, well over 20 snaps under his belt. You had a guy like Andrew Kristofik at guard who was battling, had 8 or 9 career starts. You don't have that type of experience, but you have more guys that have played than you did last year. Last year, you started 2 guys at 2 guard spots who'd never played a meaningful down in their lives. This year at guard and at least at guard, you're going to have 2 guys that have played more, whether it's Billy Schrouth, who has 3 starts under his belt now, who have played over 200 snaps last season, whether it's Coogan and Spindler again. And I talked about last week the big drop-off they had in pass game production, and how Pat Coogan last year allowed more pressures than the guards from the previous season combined. Well, you expected a drop-off, but not that big of a drop-off. Well, Pat Coogan's going to be better in year 2. Whether he's a starter or not isn't the point of this conversation. He's going to be better. So there's going to be some growth there, but you still can't dismiss the fact that this is still a very inexperienced offensive line. You're going to have a true sophomore with 1 career start at left tackle. Best case scenario from an experience standpoint, you have a 13-game starter at guard. You have a 3-game starter at center. You're going to have a 10 or a 3-game starter at the other guard and a 4-game starter at right tackle, with one of those 4 starts being a game. I mean, it's technically a start, but one of those 4 starts being the Ohio State game when he lined up as a second tight end and played just a small handful of snaps. So even though you're going to have more, you're not going to have anyone that has the inexperience that Spindler and Coogan had last year. But you also don't have the Joe Walt, the Zeke Correll, the Blake Fisher veteran presence. And that's a concern that I have about this line. And that there's nothing that can fix. There's no drill to give a guy 13 extra starts before the season starts. It's just not there. So then you have to say, okay, well, then what do we need to do to overcome the lack of experience that we have? Well, number one, do you have talent or not? Inexperience hurts you even more when you don't have a lot of talent. If you're trying to play a solid, good, steady potential guy at left tackle to replace Joe Walt, he doesn't have a lot of experience under your belt, that's concerning. When you're inexperienced guys as good as Charles Jagasaw, okay, that helps bridge the gap a little bit. Same thing with Billy Schrouth at right guard if that's where he ends up starting. Same thing with Ashton Craig if he ends up starting at center. And then at right tackle, I don't know that the talent is what it is at left tackle and at guard, for example, and center. But we'll see. But what you have is you have talent. That's step one. So then, okay, well, what needs to come next? How do we get the most out of this talent within the framework of the fact that we can't change the experience dynamic? Like, I don't want to hear Notre Dame coaches, and I don't think they will, because they're not, Mike Denbrock's not an excuse maker. Marcus Freeman's never been an excuse maker, but you never know. Things sometimes can change. But I don't want to hear any excuses coming from any writers, any fans, any coaches about, well, we don't have experience, don't have experience. You know that. And you accept certain aspects of that. There are certain things you're going to have to accept about this offensive line and how it's going to perform because it's young. Totally get that. There's going to be a little bit more up and down than you would normally expect from an offensive line that's got more experience. There's going to be, and that's like inconsistency. There's going to be some misses and mistakes that you're going to get at left tackle the next year that you didn't get at left tackle last year. And so those are all things that have to get addressed. But how do you build a culture? How do you build a line that can then overcome that with other type of strengths? And so the first thing for me that I want to see this spring is I want to see let them battle. This is going to be a big test for Joe Rudolph, in my opinion. Now, this comment doesn't mean allow battles so that Pat Coogan can get beat out, so that Rocco Spindler can get beat out, so that Tosh Baker can get beat out. I'm not saying that at all. If those three guys all start and it's because a real battle took place and the best guy was actually chosen, then I'm good with that. And what do I mean a real battle? A real battle to me means you don't go in like the quarterback competition. It's not a real battle. I understand completely why Marcus Freeman has to talk about there being a quarterback competition. Hopefully, have a starter name sooner rather than later. You have to do that because Riley Leonard's got to earn it. But we all know who's going to start a quarterback barring injury. So you can give lip service to there being a battle. You can even allow a certain guy to get a lot of reps. But if in your mind, the younger player or the second player or the guy not starting, if he has to be so much better than the guy that started, then that's not a real battle. It's more so about, hey, clean slate. Our line didn't play well enough last year for anyone to feel like they have a job locked down. That includes Charles Jagasaw. That includes Billy Shrout. That includes Ashton Craig. That includes Pat Coogan. Real battle, and let the best man win. And if the best man genuinely wins, and we can talk about what that looks like down the road, then I'm going to be happy with that, because what that means is if there's a real battle inside and Pat Coogan is still the starter because he earned that job, what that means is Pat got a lot better than what he was in 2023. Same thing with Rocco Spindler. And so what that does to me is a battle creates a sense of competition. It eliminates any potential for complacency. There's nobody that should feel like, hey, I got a spot wrapped up, here at this position, and I'm the starting left guard or I'm starting left tackle. A real battle across the board, and it should be across the board, eliminates any complacency. Because if you are complacent, then you're going to get beat out, and there's not a starter that's complacent anymore. It's really an opportunity for guys to have to be laser focused and locked in. Like if you're an offensive lineman that's going to battling for position, and you spent your spring break not thinking about football and partying a little too much or whatever, then that tells me I don't know that you're real serious about being the best player you can be. That's all part of it, because it forces you to say, hey, how bad do you want this? What are you willing to do? What extra work are you willing to do? What sacrifices are you willing to make to really be the best version of yourself? And I also think a real battle, real competition creates an attitude in the room that this unit desperately needs. There were a lot of guys that I felt last season had a sense of entitlement with how they played. And just the overall room as a whole just played at times like they were just kind of expecting people to kind of lay down because they're Notre Dame, and that didn't happen. And so to me, when you have this kind of competition, it creates a bit of an edge. It eliminates complacency. It forces you to be the best version of yourself. And that inherently creates an attitude that's going to lead into my second point, which is a big key for them this spring. Look, proper demeanor. I'll just say it right now, proper demeanor. There's a lot of technical things that got to get cleaned up, and some of that will happen in the spring, some of it will happen in the summer, some of that happen in fall camp. I mean, you're installing a new run game this spring, and Mike Denbrock's going to want to do different things than Jared Parker did, and maybe some different things that Joe Rudolph did. And we're going to learn about what a Mike Denbrock plus Joe Rudolph plus Dylan McCullough run game looks like for Notre Dame. And but what there's going to be certain parts of it that we know are going to be different, much higher use of the inside zone, for example. So there's a lot of those things that have to be learned. I don't expect this offensive line to have all the answers to that by game, by practice 15. I don't. That's an unfair expectation. You want to see growth from practice 1 to practice 15, but something that flat out can be determined and decided and implemented by practice 15 is the proper demeanor. When you guys watched Notre Dame's offensive line last year, even in games where they played well, at what point in time did you feel like, boy, this team plays with some edge? This unit plays with some attitude. Boy, this unit is getting after it, man. This unit is playing with some ferocity. This unit is really taking it to that other team. I don't know that I ever felt that. Even in the last 2 games of some of the younger players, I think that had as much to do with Stanford just not being any good And yeah, there was some toughness and all that, but you had young guys that were making young guy mistakes, and so it kind of sapped away some of that. But there was not a game last year that I felt like, wow. Now I could go back to 2022, and I can give you some games where I felt that the offensive line was playing that way. I can give you some games where I'm like, these cats are playing with some attitude. These cats are playing with some ferocity. That man, I'll tell you what, boy, this group has something. I mean, you go watch the North Carolina game last year. Go watch the BYU game last year. Go watch the Syracuse game in 2022. I'm talking about last year. Go watch the Clemson game in 2022. Go watch the Boston College game. Go watch the South Carolina game. Now, that unit was not consistent enough. They weren't good enough, but it was a big step in the right direction from where it was, which totally lacked the proper demeanor. Last year's group didn't have the same hunger and physicality of that unit. And that's part of what demeanor is. Demeanor is part physicality, it's part attitude, it's part drive, it's part hunger, where you have this burning desire to every play dominate the guy across from you. Those are all parts of what you need to have when you're talking about being a top just a top line, and not just a top line, but a line that plays football the way that Notre Dame expects its lines to play football. That's a big thing. And so that demeanor part is very, very important. And that ultimately is going to is going to go a very long way towards determining how good this line can be. Yes, you have to be assignment correct, and you have to have good technique, and you have to play together as one, and all those things are important. But that's sort of that key ingredient. Like, it's like you look at a person's body, right? And there's tons of things on my body that are bigger from a volume standpoint than my heart or my brain. Okay, but those are two things that if I don't have them, I can't function, right? Or I can't even live in certain instances. And so this part may be a smaller chunk of from a percentage standpoint of what you're trying to accomplish, but it is the thing that could make or break everything else that you're doing. And then the final piece is just the offensive line is going to have to grow up in a hurry. And I don't know how to do that as a quarterbacks coach, receivers coach. Like, I don't know the right way to instill that. That's something that O-line coaches are going to have to do. I don't know what the answer is going to be to that. But what I do know is that that's going to be a key for Coach Rudolph this spring is, what do I need to do from a teaching standpoint and from a pushing them standpoint to get this line to grow up faster? Now, every line's different. So Coach Rudolph could go with the standpoint of, I'm just going to be hard on them. I'm going to be hard on them all spring, demand a lot from them, see who's got some mental toughness, see who's got this, see who's got that. And then, really find out who my warriors are. And then we can get back to teaching in the spring and the fall camp. And I'd have no problem if he did that. He could also go sort of the opposite direction, which is, look, summer and fall camp are going to be our push them, grind on them, type of period. Right now, it's about teaching and technique and getting that part of it down. I'd have no problem with that. I don't know what the answer is. It really depends on what the makeup of the line is, and that's one where you kind of have to trust the coaching staff that they know what the makeup of the line is better than I do. And so they're going to have to pick how they figure this out. But the fact is no matter which direction they go, they have to figure out how to get this line to grow up fast. Grow up, as I said, there's nothing they can do to get them more experience from game experience. But there are things they can do to say, hey, here's what we can do to enhance their mental capacity. Here's what we can do to enhance their technical proficiency. Here's things that we can do to really work on the cohesiveness of this line. Here's things we can do to create the proper demeanor of this line. Those are all things that can be worked on right now that don't require that they have to play games to improve. And so that's always a big key. And honestly, I'm going to talk about a lot of other things during this segment, and a lot of other things are important. There's going to be more things that are going to happen in the fall, but this right here, which is why I'm going to spend the most time on it, the O-line is going to be the make or break for this offense, which in turn is kind of a make or break for the entire team. Is if this offensive line doesn't get back to being really good and dominant at times, and playing with the proper attitude and playing with the proper demeanor and the proper physicality, then a lot of this other stuff is going to be fun to watch. It's going to result in Notre Dame scoring a lot of points. It's going to result in some yards, but it's also going to result at the end of the year when it matters most, playoff semifinals, championship, Notre Dame's going to be sitting home watching on the TV like we're watching on the TV. This is an incredibly important thing, which makes Joe Rudolph's job very, very important. And I'm looking forward to seeing what Coach Rudolph does, because year two is always going to be better for him, for any O line coach, because you now, like, a lot of things that I talked about, how does this guy need to be pushed? How does this guy learn? Because I've said this before. I mean, even within receiving cores, I had as a year when I was at Christopher Newport, I had a receiver. I think I've shared this before. I had one of my top receivers. We started three receivers. One of my top receivers' dad was a drill sergeant, like literally a drill sergeant. And so the only way Curfew knew how to take coaching was very direct, very stern, like loud. This is what you need. I had another kid on that team who was a little bit more. I mean, he was very hard on the outside, but very soft on the inside, and didn't take like loud criticism very well. So I had to figure out, how do I push the right buttons for both of those guys? Well, my first year was a little harder early on than it was my second year, because my second year, like, I didn't know that about those guys when I showed up. And then after a year, you learn those type of things. You learn better how to push the right buttons. And so when I talk about how Coach Rudolph needs to say, well, what's the proper direction of going about this during the spring, and what's the right practice structure and emphasis this spring to get them to grow up fast, I don't know the answer to that. But you'd expect Coach Rudolph to have a much better sense of that now that he's in year two of being with this group as to year one, because he now knows the players involved. He knows their personalities. He knows what works. He knows what doesn't work. He knows who is going to bring it every day. So I just got to focus on the teaching with them. He knows who doesn't bring it every day. So I got to make sure that I got my foot up their pine parts every day to make sure that I'm getting the right focus and attitude. He knows all those things. So now it's about, how do I structure our emphasis and our practices for the next 13 practices plus the spring game, to make sure that by the end of the spring, we've had our battles, we've developed the proper demeanor, and our guys are growing up in all the areas that are important. That's going to be the big key for Joe Rudolph and Mike Denbrock. But it really falls on the shoulders of Joe Rudolph as the O-line coach to be able to push the right buttons and get this line to grow up in a hurry. And if you can do that, then this offensive line has a chance to be a very, very good unit. It will have some ups and downs, but when it's on, it'll look a lot more like the 2022 O-line, where there's going to be some rough games, where you're just like, they didn't have it today. They had to win on talent today. That's okay. That's going to happen. You expect that a little bit, but you're also going to have some games you're like, oh, wow, this group is really good. Like, this group is dominant. We really didn't see that last year. We did see that the year before. And I think this group, talent-wise, has a chance to be that. I expect it to be a bigger line overall. It's got a chance to be really, really good in those moments. And it's up to Coach Rudolph to get the most out of them. That's part one. I'm going to get on to part two next. But do me a favor, folks, before we do that, reminder to hit that like button and subscribe button if you haven't already done so. And I'm telling you, with the videos that I'm putting out, they're message board only stuff. You got to be a premium member. It's a great time to sign up. boards@irishbreakdown.com. You're definitely going to check that stuff out. All of you guys that are in the chat that have watched that video, that it's just a small taste of what's to come. You guys can let people know how much of a benefit it is to be a premium member at irishbreakdown.com. That's not the only focus on offense. There's three more that I'm going to dive into. I'm not going to spend quite as much time on those, but we'll get into them nonetheless, because they are very, very important. The first one is at wide receiver, and I think you guys all kind of know that this is an important fit thing. But what is it about the receiving core that's important this spring? There's position battles there. There's guys that got to improve their technique and things like that. But I'm going to focus on a certain aspect of it and how it impacts the team. And that aspect is, you've got to learn how to win at wide receiver. I think of all the things that I look at the receiving core, and, is this skill set there, or, are they doing this? Do they have that? At the end of it, if you could really point down to what the problem was last year, is you didn't have enough receivers that could win with any kind of consistency. And when I watch other top receiving cores, even if you take out like the elite players, right? That's a different deal. Like Marvin Harrison's you don't break down Ohio State and say, "See, I need you guys to play like number 18." They can't. They're not that type of player. But there's other teams you can put on the film and say, "Man, like they don't have any first round draft picks, but boy, oh boy, those guys know how to win." They have, and what does it mean to win? It means essentially exactly what I'm talking about. It comes down to where you guys you know how to win at the line. What are the techniques, the moves to win at the line? How do I win as a route runner? How do I win in space? How do I win when the ball's in the air? And this receiving core last year just did not have a lot of guys that knew how to win. Think of all the contested catch throws last year that Notre Dame's offense failed to come down with. And how oftentimes they led to interceptions. And you look at it and say, boy, this they just didn't really know how to win. And that's something that's going to have to improve in a major, major, major way next season, because it's hard to, in my opinion, to go through an entire season and play the schedule that Notre Dame plays and win the kind of games that you expect Notre Dame to win if you don't have a group of guys can win when the ball's in the air. And that's just going to be such an important part of who they are next season. And so they all kind of build together, right? And so to me, here's the task for Mike Brown. Create a better group that it can win at the line. Now, there are things Mike Denbrock can do. We broke them down last year, and he will do. And I'll have some of that in the breakdowns that I do, where they don't always have to win, right? Because there's a kind of a give and take on this. There's going to be things you're going to do where you say, hey, look, I don't need them to win on this one because I'm going to win for them with how we scheme this particular look up. But you can't do that every play. You're going to need times where I just got my guy lined up at the boundary and he's just going to have to win off the line and win down the field because we're taking this shot because they're playing cover one and we're in the left hash and the free safety is right over the ball. So he's basically on the near hash, which means I got Chris Mitchell or Jaden Greathouse or Cam Williams or KK Smith or Jaden Harrison or Jordan Faison or pick anybody. And they're Bo Collins, they're to the field. And we got to take this shot. We got to take the shot and we got to win, right? So that means you win off the line. It means you're able to have a proper post-release stem to close the guy off, to get the proper leverage. And then the quarterback's got to make the right throw. But that win has to happen. Otherwise, you require your quarterback to just drop absolute dimes. And you can't ask him to do that all the time. It means, hey, this is 3rd and 7, and I'm running this dig cut right here. And we think based on game plan that this is the route that's going to get open on 3rd and 7. I got to win at the line. I got to get inside of this guy. I got to lean him back up. I got to be really sharp and crisp. I got to fly to my break point. I got to be really sharp at the top. I got to get that immediate separation to allow the quarterback to get me the ball. And then I got to read it properly to make sure I find the open hole. That's a lot that goes into winning. You've got to win. And then it's as simple as, hey, the ball's in the air. I got to want it more than that guy does. Far too often last year, Notre Dame's receivers didn't do that. And I've talked a lot about Rico Flores having that problem. And I've always been a very pro Tobias Merriweather guy. But here's the reality. Tobias Merriweather had 2 chances against Duke to make big plays. One was contested, somewhat contested. The other one was just a little too far, where you got to say, hey, man, you got to want that ball more than that. Rico Flores, you got to want that ball more than that. You got to fight for that ball more than that. Jaden Greathouse or Jaden Thomas, you've got to want the ball more than that. And so to me, they didn't have the proper demeanor the last few years, really. And it wasn't just last year, but you could go back to the last couple seasons. I mean, think about this. Think about this for a second. Notre Dame's best contested catch guy in 2022, when you talk about who was the most impressive, like who had the really tough catches that you can think of, it was probably Braden Lindsey, who was like 185 pounds. I mean, you think about some of the tough catches he had last year. You talk about his ability to win at the top of routes and how often he got open. And when you look back and you're like, man, like that can't be. You're going to need some guys to be able to win a little bit more than that. And so And of course, Michael Mayer was another one. But you're going to need guys to be able to win at a higher level and win in the big moments, and that's going to be a big key. So for Mike Brown, there's really three aspects to this. Number one is technical, and there's two aspects to the technical part. One is you've got to be better at the line. You've got to be better once you get into your route. There's a lot of proper angles. There's like the breakdown that I had yesterday. There was a play on there, and you'll have to go to the board for the full breakdown. But there's a play on there where Cincinnati's receivers running a seam route. Notre Dame's in zone coverage. JD Bertrand does a great job of rerouting, gets the guy all the way outside the numbers, but the receiver knows as soon as I clear the linebacker, I got to hump it back inside to get back on my track to get so the quarterback can get me the ball, and I don't have that outside corner squeezing down and cover three on me. Notre Dame's guys last year would kind of get ridden outside and then just kind of slowly drift inside, and then the corner could close the route off, and there wasn't anywhere to throw the football. And little things like that. Like you've got to really understand the technique needed to win at the line, and then also the technique needed or the understanding of I've got to get back to here as I'm breaking my route, or as I'm getting into my route. You have to have guys that understand when to be sharper on top ends and when they don't need to be sharper on top ends. I'm a big believer in being really crisp and really sharp, whether it be with your leans, but your top end technique needs to be really crisp and really sharp. And Notre Dame's receivers were very lazy at the top ends last couple years, really, last several years, actually. Very lazy with how they snap off their top ends. And so to me, that's an important piece to this whole conversation because you've got to have some level of technical understanding of why this is important. And so for when you look at Mike Brown, one of the goals he's going to have this season, one of the objectives he's going to have this season is he's going to have to get his players to understand the importance of going into games with the knowing when they need to be really sharp and when they don't. Because there's times when, look, I'm facing zone. I don't have to be sharp. I have to get to my depth. I've got to come level. I've got to get to the open zone, but I don't need to necessarily like stem you out and snap it inside and break it off and do all these kind of things because guess what? I'm playing zone. There's nobody on my hip. I don't need to do all that. I don't have a safety who I'm trying to influence right now because they're playing cover three and I'm running an inside breaking route, right? Your focus technical is more on, the proper release, make sure you don't get rerouted. If you do get rerouted, getting back into your proper stem and things along those lines. Those are the things that you have to focus on and understand when you need to do that and when you don't. And when you go back and you think about like what are some of the best moments that we've seen from Notre Dame players, we talk about Mike Denbrock, right? When you talk about Will Fuller beating Adoree Jackson in 2015, go back and watch that route. Will Fuller can't beat Adoree Jackson if he's not really fast. But watch the route. He stems Adoree Jackson up, widens him, and when he gets to the top of his route, he really sticks that outside move. He gets Will Fuller Will Fuller gets him thinking, I'm running a go. He attacks his outside shoulder. You'll see it on film. You can watch the replay. You see Will Fuller go towards the outside shoulder of Adoree Jackson, which is what I always teach, and then stick him on the top. And so what happens is Adoree leans out, and kind of that one split second of thinking he's going outside is all Will Fuller needed to snap it off and break inside and beat him for a post route touchdown. Now, could Will Fuller have beaten him for a big gain without that? Possibly. But what most likely happens is Deshaun Kaiser throws a great ball. Will Fuller catches it, and it's a 45-yard gain. Okay, great, big play. But is there a guarantee that you're going to go down the field and score another touchdown? You still got 40 yards to go. That can be the difference between that. And you want another example of the opposite. Watching Notre Dame in 2019, playing USC at home. And Chase Claypool is running a post route against, I think it's Isaac Taylor Stewart. I think it's who it was going against. And he releases inside. Taylor's playing the same exact coverage that Adoree Jackson was playing. And so he's playing the post. And so Chase releases right inside of him. So Isaac Taylor Stewart just stays right on top of him. There's never an outside threat. Chase gives a half-hearted outside stick move, but there was no threat. So Isaac Taylor Stewart didn't need to lean it all outside. And then Chase kind of just drifts to the post. Now, because he's so much better than Isaac Taylor Stewart, he was able to get some initial separation. But because he never threatened the guy outside, Isaac Taylor Stewart was able to just immediately close on Chase and break up the pass. Now, the difference between the speed that Chase Claypool has relative to Isaac Taylor Stewart compared to the speed that Will Fuller has compared to Adoree Jackson is substantial, meaning Claypool was the faster player in that battle between the two, where Adoree Jackson was really fast and Will Fuller's really fast. Chase Claypool was a guy that, to me, was when you look at on the field, 40 times are probably close, but on the field, Chase Claypool was a faster player than Isaac Taylor Stewart was. And so when you think about that play, that little bit of not having to get Isaac Taylor Stewart to at all be threatened outside allowed him to use the speed he does have, which was pretty good, to close on that route. Whereas the Will Fuller was able to create that extra second of hesitation and that outside lean with Adoree Jackson. That's the difference between one plays a 75-yard touchdown and the other one gets broken up by the USC DB. Same team, same route, same coverage structure. One guy ran with sharp technique and understood, I've got to win here. And the other guy just said, I'm better than you. Well, you can be better than the other guy, but if you don't play with that urgency that I got to win here, then guess what? You're not going to make that play. Will Fuller understood, I've got to win right here. I've got to beat this guy. How do I beat him? I could just try and outrun him, but no, I'm going to be smart. I'm going to use the technique I'm taught. I'm going to attack his leverage, aiming point outside shoulder, get him to lean, stick that top end after the lean outside, stick that top end, accelerate out of your break, 75-yard touchdown compared to pass and completion. And so it's those little things that you have to understand. You'll watch Marvin Harrison on film, and there's times he just kind of, it looks like a lazy route, like he just kind of bends it inside, and you're like, man, that wasn't a really crisp route. He's playing zone. He was smart enough to understand, hey, I don't have to do that route here because it's zone. I just got to get in. I got to be fast vertical, but I just got to break my route off and get into the open zone. And so when you see other times where he is sharper and he does win because he understands, I've got to win here. And the Notre Dame receiving corps has not understood that for a long time. They haven't had that. Kevin Austin struggled with this. Chase Claypool struggled with this. I think Javon McKinley is probably the best guy they had at it as an outside guy, and Avery Davis was the best guy that had that inside. But far too often, they just kind of rely on, okay, I'm running a post route here with no really thought or emphasis on how I need to win with this post route. It's not just, hey, I have a post route, but how do I got to win? Okay, I'm going against this guy. Is he inside leverage, outside leverage? Is he head up? Based on film breakdowns, when he plays this way, okay, he's inside leverage, but he's turned inside. So that means he's going to actually bail out, or he's playing me right here, which means he's more head up and he's inside, which means he's probably going to stay there. And now I got to think, okay, how I'm going to win on this post route is going to be a whole lot different than how I would have if he's playing me head up or outside. Those are all aspects of it where the mental part of being a receiver comes into play. But it's the focus on your craft. And if you guys have heard me say something about the receiving corps in recent years, the one thing I've said is there's just not enough focus on their craft. To me, the best receivers are guys who are obsessed over their craft. They are obsessed with footwork and winning off the line and getting to the top ends and winning this way, and understand I've got to win every single snap. And to me, if they can get this group with the talent they have to be more hungry winners when it comes to the technical part of playing college football and playing wide receiver, then I think that is going to have a major impact on this offense. Because here's the deal. What does it mean? Number one, if they get to that point, it means their attitude has changed. It's no longer just going through the motions. It's now about, hey, we play with an edge. We play with an attitude. We play with, I don't just want to get open. I want to embarrass you, right? That's a big part of it, is guys that really take their craft seriously aren't just looking to get a step open. They're not just looking to be able to make the catch. They want to come off the line and really smash you. I want to get you turned around. I want to be able to rewind that play in the film room on Monday and be like, watch how I had this guy. Watch how I had this guy. Look what I did to this guy. And that's what you want. It's an attitude. It's a I take my craft seriously and I understand mentally how I need to win, and then I go carry it out because I've practiced this a million times. And so that's something Mike Brown is going to have to instill, but that's also something the players are going to have to develop. I can teach you everything I want, but if you as a player don't take pride in your craft, it doesn't matter what I teach you because now you're just doing drills just to make me happy. It's not something that you take pride in. And the Notre Dame receivers in the past haven't really done that. And that's something they need to do because that allowed them to win. So the attitude part is first, but there's more to it than that. The other factor is, and this hurt Notre Dame last year, and they've got to make sure it doesn't hurt Mike Denbrock. If Jared Parker didn't call a play that could scheme a guy open, they oftentimes didn't win. They weren't going to make plays because outside of Mitchell Evans and occasionally Jaden Greathouse, occasionally Chris Tyree, and occasionally Jordan Faison, they didn't have guys that understood how to get open and even guys that had the ability. And so what would happen was the big plays would have to be things where he'd scheme up a certain thing to get someone open. You can't do that all the time. There's a time and a place to do that, but you have to be able to call plays to say, hey, we're just going to win. Like one of the breakdowns I'm going to do, and it'll be up either tonight or tomorrow, is how Mike Denbrock uses motion to impact the defense. And there's a couple plays on there that result in big plays. Two of them are touchdowns against Bama, where the way he used motion and getting a guy in movement and some post-snap switch stuff impacted the defense in a way where it created big play opportunities. But you can't do that every time. If you look at a lot of the other plays that LSU had, yes, they would do things where he would scheme guys open, but there's times where, like, look, it's 1 versus 1. They're 8 in the box, 2 corners playing man coverage, safety in the middle of the field. He can't impact either go route. We're going to have something occupy him up the middle. We're going to send our tight end, on a backside seam across his face, so he's going to be thread. He can't get that outside ball. So it's as simple as this. You got to win. And if I'm an offensive coordinator and I don't have guys who can just win, hey, man, one-on-one, I need you to beat him on this post. I need you to beat him on this go. I need you to beat him in this situation. Then guess what? When you play the better teams in your schedule, the Texas A&Ms, the Florida States, you get into the postseason, or I'd say Louisville's, you get into the postseason, you're playing the Georgias, the Michigans, the Texas teams like that. You're playing the Oregons. When you're playing those football teams, if you don't have guys that can win, it's impossible for me as an offensive coordinator to design a game plan that's going to allow us to win because of the offense. We're going to have to scrape by, and hopefully we can make enough plays. If I have guys that can win and I can scheme stuff open, that's how you have an elite offense. That's how you develop the combination to win, because sometimes it's like, as a coordinator, I've got to be able to do this. Like Jared Parker last year did not have this in his toolbox when they were playing Ohio State and playing NC State, NC State, when they were playing Clemson, when they were playing Louisville. He did not have it in his toolbox to say, hey, look, we got a one-on-one out here. I just got to throw the go route, and we got to win here. Because every time they did that, it got picked off. It was an interception. Guys got ridden out of bounds. They just got dominated, right? They just got dominated for those things. And so you have to be able to say, hey, look, are you able to go win? Now, part of that is talent. You've got to have players who can do that. But I'm sorry, I don't want to hear any excuses about that, because between just looking outside, Chris Mitchell, Cam Williams, Deion Colsey, Jaden Greathouse, Bo Collins, Micah Gilbert, you could use Jaden Greathouse out there, KK Smith. If you can't get situations where some of those guys are winning on the outside, then that's not a talent problem. That's either a coaching problem or an attitude problem. And so to me, this comes down to when I watch Kevin Austin, for example, because here's a great question from Ball Pinch lately. He says, so are individual guys not winning caused by lack of talent or lack of development? It's lack of development. Flat out lack of development, because as I said, Kevin Austin, 6'2 plus, 4.43 in the 40-yard dash, borderline 40-yard vertical jump. He would lose all the time at the line of scrimmage. He would lose all the time on downfield throws. Good teams with good technique could knock him out of the game, right? When you look at Braden Lindsey, it wasn't until his last year that you started to see him really grow. Why? Because that was when he finally got someone to kind of work on the developmental piece, just a little bit. And it didn't take a lot with Braden Lindsey to kind of be that way. And then Braden Lindsey kind of started taking some things on his own. You look at a guy like Deion Colsey, you look at, a lot of these players, like they've just not been given the tools to be successful, because I don't think it's a talent problem. Have never thought it's a talent problem. It's always been, does this guy have heart? Does this guy want it? And is this guy being coached in a way that allows him to thrive? And the reality is that hasn't been the case for a long time. And that's why Javon McKinley doesn't catch a single pass until his senior year and doesn't have a breakout till year 5. And part of it is him, but part of it was he wasn't being developed in the way he needed to be developed. So I think that's across the board. Now, you've got some guys coming in this year that have been developed by other people. We'll see how that goes. But at the end of the day, again, Jaden Thomas, Deion Colsey, Chris Mitchell, Cam Williams, Micah Gilbert, Jaden Greathouse, KK Smith. Am I forgetting anybody? Those are just outside guys. Then you look inside, Greathouse inside there as well. Jaden Harrison's a guy that's a 4-3 guy. Jordan Faison. There are plenty of options of guys that can win with their talent, but they've got to play because they're not so talented that they can just go out there and beat the best corner snap after snap after snap. You're going to lose some. You're going to lose some of those battles, but in the big moments, or there's at least going to be enough wins that, like right now, if we're going to take 5 deep shots in the game, the difference between us winning 3 of those 5 or 2 of those 5 is a lot different than winning 1 of those 5 or none of those 5. Because even if it's just 2 of 5, that's 80 yards that we just gained. Then that impacts how you go about them. And if I can win 3 of those 5, then that completely changes the makeup of the game, because I just added over 100 yards on 3 plays. And because we're just winning on the outside, even if it's just 60% of the time, it's going to change everything that you're doing. And then when you include some of the things that Mike Denbrock can then do to scheme guys open, that's going to be helpful as well, because you can't rely all the time on having to scheme guys open. And a perfect example of that, look at USC the last couple of years. I think Lincoln Riley is a tremendous, tremendous play designer. I mean, he's in the conversation with Sark and Lane Kiffin as far as just some of the best there is and just designing up plays to get guys open. But against Notre Dame, couldn't get away with that this past season. Against Utah the year before in the conference title game, couldn't get away with that. Got away with it in the regular season, but didn't get away with it in the postseason, because in Notre Dame's case and in Utah's case, they had talent in the secondary good enough to say, hey, we're going to lock you down and you can't beat us one-on-one. And they couldn't beat them one-on-one. And so you didn't have guys that could win. So you're smart enough as a defensive staff. Yeah, you're going to get your plays here and there, but we're going to largely shut you down because our dudes are better than your dudes. And so at the end of the day, talent only gets you so far, and scheme can only get you so far. You need the talent, you need the scheme, but then you need the technical proficiency, the mastering of your craft to be able to say, hey, I can win. In this situation, I can win. Mike Denbrock knew. Gave up a touchdown. He knew. First play of the game. They practiced. They had this on their play sheet. And why did Mike Denbrock – do you think Mike Denbrock said first play against USC in 15, hey, Will Fuller's faster than Adoree Jackson, so we're going to go out there and we're going to run this play, and Will Fuller's just going to run right by Adoree Jackson. Just going to run right by him. It's going to be a long touchdown because Adoree Jackson can't run with Will Fuller. Do you think that's what Mike Denbrock thought going into that game? No, he didn't, because he knew Adoree Jackson could run with Will Fuller about as well as anybody else. But he knew that hey, we're going to run this route, and they taught Will Fuller, because he's a receivers coach then, this is how you win on this play. Will Fuller executed that technique, and then 75-yard touchdown. So it's got to be both. It's got to be both. That's why I'm excited about Mike Brown being at Notre Dame and Mike Denbrock being at Notre Dame, because that's 2 guys with a proven track record of winning here. And to me, if they're able to do that, then I start feeling a lot better about what this football team can be and what this offense can be, because you're going to have the demeanor. Look, the talent's always been there. There have been years where there's significant depth problems, which meant if this guy doesn't pan out or this guy gets injured, you're in trouble. I'll give you that. But more often than not, the talent is there. You have to develop it. In 2017, I've said, well, you're trying to beat Georgia with Freddie Canteen and Cam Smith and Chris Fink. I'm like, yeah, it's because you had Chase Claypool and Miles Boykin sitting on the bench because you hadn't developed them. That's a you problem, not a player problem. That's a you problem. The fact that you couldn't get junior Miles Boykin and sophomore Chase Claypool coached up enough to go out and have them play in game 2 against Georgia, that's not a talent problem, folks. I mean, think about this. In 2017, Notre Dame's trying to beat Georgia with you had Equanimous St. Brown, but then other than him, you had Freddie Canteen, Cam Smith, and Chris Fink were the guys getting reps in that game. They're the ones that got the. I'm going to actually pull this game up actually real quick because I want to make my point on this one. So just give me a second because I want to get this point across because this is very important because this is the difference between teams that are losing and winning these games. Imagine what Notre Dame beating Georgia in 2017 would have meant for that football team. Imagine that. You had Chris Fink play 19 snaps. Freddie Canteen played 23 snaps. Cam Smith played 66 snaps. Equanimous St. Brown played 69 snaps. Chase Claypool played 6. Michael Young played 7. And Miles Boykin played 6. Think about that. 23 reps for Freddie Canteen, who had never done anything in Michigan except be experienced. He had 23 reps, which is almost double what Miles Boykin and Chase Claypool had combined. Chris Fink had more snaps in that game than Miles Boykin and Chase Claypool combined. Cam Smith had more snaps in that game than Miles Boykin and Chase Claypool had combined times 5. So don't tell me this is a talent problem. Miles Boykin was a junior. A year later, he was going to break out and turn himself to an NFL draft pick, 3rd round. By the end of that year, he has a breakout performance against LSU. Chase Claypool's 2 years away from turning himself into a 2nd-round draft pick. These are 6'4" plus guys that ran 4.4s, and in the second game of his junior year with Miles Boykin, and in the second game of his sophomore, Chase Claypool, you couldn't have them more ready to play than Freddie Canteen, Chris Fink, and Cam Smith. That's not a knock on those guys. Those guys should have played, but they should be complimentary players. You're asking Chris Fink to go out there and win against Georgia. You're asking Cam Smith and Freddie Canteen to win on 3rd and 10 on a game-winning drive against Georgia. Why? Because you didn't develop the 6'4", 4'4", 40-inch vertical jump guys that you had on your football team. Again, is it talent or is it development? 100% development. Imagine if Notre Dame had a real receivers coach on that 2017 team. And you had senior Equanimous St. Brown, junior Miles Boykin, sophomore sophomore Chase Claypool. You had, junior Chris Fink, plus Cam Smith and the rest of the depth. Think about this. You're telling me a real receivers coach couldn't have had those guys ready to play? What does that Georgia game, they lost by 1 point, look like if for 60 minutes I'm throwing St. Brown, Claypool, Boykin, and Fink at you? Think about that. Is it talent or is it development? It's development. The talent is there. Do they have the talent that LSU had in their number 1 and 2 last year? No, they don't. But in one of the clips I'm going to show on the breakdown, it's not Brian Thomas or Malik Neighbors winning on this play. It's Lacey, who Notre Dame does have guys as good as him. So to me, it comes down to the players have to take pride in their craft. The coaches have to then give them the tools to then go out and become those experts in knowing how to win. That's the key. It's both. It can't just be one. It's got to be both. And so there's a player part of it that has to come into this, and then there's a coaching part. Now, the good news is Notre Dame has the kind of depth now where if this guy doesn't want to work, if this guy doesn't want to take pride in his craft, as long as these coaches are willing to say, hey, listen, there's nothing guaranteed. Chris Mitchell didn't come here, I don't think, to just kind of go through the motions. But if he does, okay, fine, I'm going to play somebody else. If Jaden Thomas thinks, hey, I'm a senior, my moment's arrived, this is me, and it's going to be given to me, he's going to get beat out. Now, fortunately, I don't think Jaden Thomas is that kind of player. I don't think Chris Mitchell's that kind of player. But if they are, or if they are doing the right things, but they get injured or something happens, the depth is such that you guys have got to be on their toes. And there's much more of a push. And that's something that I'm excited about when I look at this football team and I think about what this receiving core could be. I'm going to talk about one final piece to this offense, and this is going to come down to situational football. And situational football for me comes down to red zone and third down. Notre Dame last year ranked 24th in the nation on third down. Not bad, right? Pretty good. But here's the key: they were 30.6% success rate on third down in the games they lost. If you look at 2022 with Tommy Rees as the OC, Notre Dame ranked 13th in third down offense, but they only converted 33.3% of their third downs in their 4 losses. Not a coincidence. And so when you look at some of the issues LSU had last year and some of the games they lost or games they should have won more convincingly, they had some red zone woes. Now the red zone part to me is going to kind of get taken care of itself because there were times Mike Denbrock's trying to go double tight with a X receiver and that backside because they just had the depth at tight end. They had a lot of injuries at tight end last year. So I think they'll be fine. So that part I think we can take care of. But to me, the red zone part is a lot about the other things. Red zone is about demeanor up front, toughness up front, physicality up front. You know, receivers knowing how to win, receivers knowing how to get open in those situations, and there's a lot of that to it. The third down part is a lot of that too. But here's what it comes down to: the spring is not important in third down and red zone from a figuring out the scheme standpoint. Here's the thing that needs to be figured out and addressed this spring. Number one, it's not so much that by the end of April, you as a coach say, hey, listen, I know my 5 favorite red zone third down plays. I know my 5 favorite red zone plays. I mean, you may have that, but that's not really the key. That's not going to determine, are we going to be good at it? What's going to be determined, the effectiveness is going to be this. Who are our clutch players? Who are guys that can win? Who are guys who can go out there and say, hey, listen, on 3rd and 5, I want the ball. Notre Dame's had that in the past. Like 2021, I thought, prior to him getting hurt, Avery Davis and Michael Mayer, between the two of them, like I always felt good in 2021 that Notre Dame had a shot to move the chains in a big moment on 3rd down, which is kind of interesting because they weren't actually great on 3rd down that year. But I just kind of had that feeling because you had those guys that could win. You look at 2022 with all the issues they had. You just felt like, okay, Michael Mayer on 3rd down, they all know what's happening, but he's still going to get open and win. Or if he is covered, they're just going to throw the ball up and he's going to go make a play. Or you just felt like the offensive line in a situation is going to make a play. You kind of felt like, hey, here's our guys. Here's our clutch guys. Who is that this spring? Who's that going to be? Is it going to be one of the running backs? Is it going to be one of the tight ends or 2 of the tight ends, one of the receivers, 2 of the receivers? Who are those guys that step up this spring and say, hey, listen, coach, when it's on the line, man, it's 3rd down, you get me the ball. You design something to allow me to have a chance to win and get open, and I'm going to do it, and you get me the rock. And so to me, that's more about what this is about, is you're developing your attitude, you're developing your culture. It's not so much about scheme as it's about who are my guys. So you want to put certain guys in situations and say, hey, you can talk the talk. Hey, coach, I want the ball in this situation. Okay, cool. Well, tomorrow's practice. We're going to go out there and we're going to work on this, and this, and I'm going to find out. So like one thing I would do if I was Mike Brown, if I had a guy that was really trying to push, okay, I think this guy's pretty good. Every time we're going one-on-one, so hold on, Morrison's up. Come here. My guy that I'm trying to, hey, Dion, you go against Morrison. If I'm trying to push Dion Colsey. No. Hey, Chris Mitchell, I want to see you go against Benjamin Morrison. Things where you really challenge them and put them in those situations. Hey, 3rd down, coach, let's make sure we really focus on, trying to get, such and such player the ball today. All right. Because I want to find out if this kid really wants it. And then, on the plays that don't work, what's his demeanor like? Does he put his head down? Does he kind of walk back? Is it not a big deal to him? You learn a lot about those things. And then the other part is you develop an attention to detail in the spring. And the reason I say you develop it is because it has to be a focus from day one. Hey, guys, little things. Like like if I was Mike Brown, if I was Dylan McCullough and Mike Denbrock, Joe Rudolph, Gino Gaduli, like every little thing I just would be on them about. Because if you don't focus on the importance of attention to detail now, you can't flip that switch on in August and September. It's got to be now. And a lot of times, like, yes, I can come up with scheme, but 3rd down is attention to detail. My receiver knew the route to run. He got open, and as soon as he caught the ball, he got tackled a yard short of the line. Why? Did I teach it that way? No, I told him to push for 2 more yards, break that thing off and come back. But he was so rushed thinking, I got to win, I got to win, I got to win, that he didn't have the attention to detail. So the effort was there. The attitude was there. I can win, but the attention to detail wasn't there. So I won, but I won a yard short of the sticks. See what I'm saying? And so, or, I won on my post route. I got out of, hey, I'm running a post route. We called this play. I got a chance for a big play here on 3rd and 4, because we're in 2-down territory. So we're going to take a shot to the end zone. But I make my break too soon. I make my break on the post 3 yards too soon, or 3 steps too soon. And so by the time the quarterback gets to his drop, gets the ball out, that corner has recovered and he can now make a play. Or I'm trying to take a deeper shot. Well, actually, that's the case. I'm trying to take a deeper shot. The quarterback he gets to the back and he wants to throw it, but you're pushing your route 2 to 3 steps too deep. And now the timing of the play is off, right? You may have won, but the quarterback's now running for his life because he didn't know that you knew the route because you weren't even at your break point yet. If you're at your break point, he sees you stick that top end, he's letting that ball go, throw it out over the middle. But if you're still running, he might think you're running a corner or a go. He may think you got the route completely wrong. And so I won at the line. I had, I wanted it. My technique was there, but the attention to detail wasn't there and the play didn't work. And so to me, those are the things that are going to be a big focus for me when you look at this team in the spring. So it's getting the offensive line figured out, proper demeanor. They got to grow up fast. The receivers got to learn how to win. And you've got to start developing the proper attitude and the proper focus to thrive in situational football, in the situational parts of the football game. 3rd down, 4th down, red zone, sudden change, backed up, all those things. It's not so much about the scheme this spring. You'll be obviously you're putting in scheme, but it's more because you're gonna. And what I mean, it's not scheme. You understand? You're running scheme. You're calling plays. You're doing things you think are going to work. But this is the time of the year where you think we're going to focus on this. We're going to major on this, minor on this. But how the spring goes, you realize we can't really major on that right now because I was able to do this at LSU because I had Brian Thomas. I don't have Brian Thomas right now. Or I was able to do this at Notre Dame in 2015 because I had Will Fuller. I don't have Will Fuller right now. So we can't do that, but we're going to be able to do this, and this, right? So yes, scheme is important, but it's more so about creating the right attitude, the right focus, the right demeanor to then implement the scheme into when you get to the fall. That's really what the spring is about. And those 3 areas are where I really want to see the most attention to detail for Notre Dame. So we're gonna get into defense next. But before we do, folks, do me a favor: hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review, and I promise you, if you continue, you've been resisting my calls to get you to join the message board this entire time. I'm telling you, now is a perfect time to jump on there. I'm telling you, you're gonna love the stuff we got coming up over the next few months. It's a great time to do it. It's cheap. It's still only $4.99 a month. $49.99 for a year. I promise you, you're going to love what we have to offer. Definitely want to check that out at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Part 2 of today's show is going to look at the Notre Dame defense. This is going to be a little bit shorter section because a couple things. Number one is there's some guys that aren't going to be here this spring. Not many, but a couple that we're going to have to really see what they do in the fall, but more so because the defense is already pretty good. And so in certain areas, it's kind of like, well, what's your focus this spring? Okay, our focus is on making sure that we, at the beginning, maintain this level here and then build on it. So for the most part, the Notre Dame defense played championship football last year. Even in 2022, when it wasn't as good of a defense, we've talked about this, they still held Ohio State to 22 points. They still only give up 19 points defensive points to Marshall. They only give up, 16 points to Stanford. In all but the USC game, the defense played well enough to win every game. Didn't play championship football, but they played well enough to win. And in the last 2 years, I would argue there's only really twice that the defense didn't play good enough to win. And that would be Louisville this year in the second half, and then last year against USC. You could talk Clemson this year. A buddy of mine had mentioned the Clemson game. They didn't play great against Clemson this year, but they, in my opinion, they certainly played well enough to win. I mean, because they scored 31 points, I get that, but 7 of those were off the offense because they had a pick six in that game. They had another drive that was only 41-yard touchdown drive. That's all they needed because of another, I think it was a shanked punt or something like a short punt plus a return. And then you had a muffed punt that allowed Clemson to get a field goal drive where they didn't have to gain a single yard. I mean, you held Clemson to 285 yards of offense and 4.1 yards per play. I'm sorry, that's good enough to win. And how many possessions in a row in the second half? They gave them like 6 straight possessions with a chance to tie, and the offense never got past midfield. So I think they've played well enough to win. The question now is, number one, maintenance. This spring is maintenance. It's about making sure that Xavier Watts doesn't have a drop-off. Benjamin Morrison doesn't have a drop-off. Your D tackles don't have a drop-off. You're not overloading those guys with work this offseason. Jack Kaiser doesn't have a drop-off. You're making sure that you're maintaining in those areas. And then there's other parts of it that, you've got to develop some other younger players, and that's a lot of the focus is going to be on in this section, is about developing the question marks that you have. And then there's one area that I really feel like the defense has to do better. I have questions about, can younger players execute certain things the way that the veteran players did? But within that, you also have to understand Al Golden and his staff developed a culture last year that is pretty good, and attention to detail that was excellent last year. So even though it may not be as good this year because you have younger players, the foundation has been laid of why it matters and that you have to play that way. So I think that part of it is pretty good. And I'll hear people say in the chat, run defense, and that's not really the focus in the spring. And it's the end game is that, but that's not the focus, and we'll get to it. So what is the focus? So offensively, we talk about fixing issues. Defensively, it's more about enhancing strengths and making sure that you don't take steps back because of departures. Okay, so let's get into some of those things. Number one focus this spring is going to have to be on building the safety depth. More than any position, this is the greatest unknown on the Notre Dame football team. Because yes, and I don't know that we're talking about this enough. Number one, yes, I understand why there's a level of expectation at safety because we think of Xavier Watts. He was an All-American last year. He's a great player, great leader. He's back. I expect him to be every bit as good as he was this past season, if not better. Now, the stats may not show it, but he's going to be excellent. And so your goal with Xavier Watts is just, let's not make sure we don't have him regress. How can he regress? Okay, he cannot work as hard. Not worried about that because Xavier's hungry. It's more so about, okay, let's not overload him. Let's not make sure we have him risk to injury. Let's not put too much on him responsibility-wise that he now has to, he can't play within the structure because we're asking him to do so much and he can't execute him as high of a level as he did last year. As long as you're not doing that, then he's going to be fine. But outside of it, some big question marks. And one of the things is you went out and got Rod Hurd to hopefully battle there. But he's not. Two things about Rod Hurd. Number one, he played nickel, so he didn't play safety at Northwestern. Now, the way he played nickel is a lot closer to how Notre Dame uses its boundary safety which is what I think he'll play because Xavier Watts is the field safety. But it's closer to how Notre Dame uses their boundary safety than it is to how Notre Dame uses their nickel. You don't see Rod Hurd playing a lot of man coverage the way that they use their it's coming downhill. It's bigger. I mean, he had 80 plus tackles last year. He didn't have 80 plus tackles last year because he was getting beat a lot in coverage and man to man and had to make a bunch of tackles. That's not why Rod Hurd had a lot of tackles last year. He had a lot of tackles last year primarily because when he did give up completions, a lot of times it was zone stuff where he was letting him catch the ball and then you just drive down on the ball. And so there was a lot of that to it. So when you look at the way that Rod played last year, he gave up 44 completions, which is a lot. But if you watch it, it's like a lot of that stuff was kind of in front of him. And, he's dropping on the ball because they had him playing more as like a downhill zone player than a man player. So that's a big part of it to understand how he's used. Well, that's more about how Notre Dame uses their safeties than it is anything about his ability to not cover. Does that make sense? So you look at like Thomas Harper last year gave up 26 receptions. And you look at Clarence Lewis last year, who was the other safety, gave up 14 receptions. So Notre Dame's Nichols gave up about 40 catches last year. Not all of those were outside because Clarence Lewis gave up a couple outside. But last year, when you look at Thomas Harper, he played 246 coverage snaps, and Rod Hurd last year played 414 coverage snaps. So there's also a lot of opportunities. The point being, the transition for him should be somewhat smooth. But guess what? We don't know that because he's here, but he can't practice. And so that leaves a question mark. I think that's a great opportunity for Notre Dame. Rod Hurd's going to be a fifth-year senior next year. He's a smart kid, tough kid, good athlete. He's going to be at practices and meetings. He just can't practice because he's still enrolled in Northwestern. But as Marcus Freeman said, him and Bo Collins are living here, which means they're doing a lot of online courses. And then for Rod Hurd, if there's something he needs to do that's not online, he's 2 hours away from Northwestern's campus. He can get over there and be there for it. So when you look at Rod Hurd, you think he's going to be there in the fall, but this opens up an opportunity for the young players to step into that void and play. Because here's the deal. If Rod Hurd is everything the Notre Dame coaches hope he's going to be, and he's a starter and he's a very good player, he's a better version of DJ Brown, which I think he certainly can be. And DJ was steady last year, but there were some limitations. I don't think Rod has as many limitations. It's just about can you be as steady? We'll see if he can make that transition, but he was for Northwestern. And as I said, I don't think it's a huge transition for what he was asked to do at Northwestern to what he's asked to do in Notre Dame. It's not like Sam Hartman changing offense. This is a completely different thing on how it's going to be used. But even if that happens, the reality is you can't play two safeties all year. This is especially true in this era where you need to play 16 games to win a championship. You can't play Xavier Watts 1,000 snaps. You can't. He'll wear down. You can't play Rod Hurd 1,000+ snaps. You have to be able to have a rotation. Now, against Florida State, you may play them almost the entire game. But in a lot of the other games, you need to be able to have that rotation. And so even if Rod Hurd and Xavier Watts are everything we hope they're going to be, the young players have got to step up. And we don't know if they will. There's some talent there, but we don't know if they will. There's a lot they're going to have to learn. This is a big spring for Don Schuler. Not that – and not from the standpoint of if he doesn't do it now, he'll never do it. No, he'll have plenty of chances down the road to do it. It's a big spring for Don Schuler because they need him this year to play. They need a Don to help this year. They need him to take that step. They need him to take full advantage of all the reps that he's going to get because Rod Hurd's not here and because DJ Brown has graduated and because Ramon Henderson transferred. They need him to take full advantage of that. I think he can, but we need to see it. That needs to be a major point of emphasis for Mike Mickens, for Marty Biaggi, and for Al Golden. Major point of emphasis. But he's not alone. And another guy that I've got my eye on that I think they really need to make sure that they're spending the time needed to get him ready to play is Luke Talich. Now, they got to be a little careful with him because he's coming off the shoulder injury. But to me, Luke and Adon are very unique players. They can both play boundary. They can both play boundary. I think Luke can do some things center field wise that maybe Adon isn't quite good at. Adon can do some things coming downhill, taking on blocks. Maybe he's a little better than Luke is in these areas. But the fact is they need both of those guys to step up and play. I think Luke gives you some field boundary potential that maybe where Adon is more of a true boundary safety. Luke gives you more field safety potential. I think I said field boundary potential. Field safety potential that maybe Adon doesn't. So it's better if both of them step up. But that's got to be a big priority for the Notre Dame coaching staff this spring is getting those guys. And then there's Ben Minnick and Kennedy Urlacher. But the reality is safety is such an important part of this defense. And I was talking to a buddy of mine last night, and this is kind of one of the things that kind of popped in my head as I was, figuring out my topics for today. We're talking about the safety position, and it was a very steady position last year, a lot of the year, because you could get away with just playing Xavier and DJ a lot, and then when Ramon did play, you kind of mask him a little bit and hide him a little bit. Now you couldn't against Ohio State, but you're in a situation where usually you could. It was a steady position for Notre Dame overall. There were some issues at the other safety spot athletically at times. Ramon Henderson was a liability at times. But it was you still had some good moments. There's a chance the safety position takes a step back this year. And that's not good because you couldn't afford to take a step back from what it was. It was where it needs to be minimum last season. You need it to be better. The question is, can it be better? You're going to have a lot less experience, but I would argue you're going to have more range and athleticism as a group than you had last year. Ramon Henderson was a very good athlete. He doesn't know how to play football. He wasn't an instinctive football player. DJ Brown was an instinctive football player, but he didn't have the athleticism. To me, Adon and Luke have both. They have both traits that need to be good. So to me, a big part of this spring isn't, we talked about those guys needing to step up, but it's also from a coaching standpoint, you've got to make sure you're doing what you need to do to give them every opportunity. So, Marty Biaggi spending the extra time, Mike Mickens especially spending the extra time as a position coach, but Al Golden and Marty Biaggi also both need to help Mike Mickens out in this regard because there are so many young guys. Mike Mickens has to make sure that he's getting the nickel position where it needs to be. He's getting the young corners where it needs to be. He's got to figure out how they're going to replace Cam Hart. He's got to get Christian Gray going. He's got to make sure he's getting Benjamin Morrison ready to rock and roll, right? So he's going to need help there. Any DB coach who's got the whole 5 positions is going to need some help there when you've got young players. So that's where Marty Biaggi comes in. But that's also something that Al Golden's going to have to take a little bit of attention to as well because they need that position to be really steady at the very least this season because if there's a lot of mistakes being made at the other safety position, guys, I promise you, good offensive coaches are going to be able to look to say, hey, listen, it may not be A&M, but by the time you get to Jeff Brom in Louisville, by the time you get to Mike Norvell and Alex Atkins at Florida State, definitely by the time you get into the postseason, those coaches on offense are going to be good enough to say, hey, listen, I know some ways to get that matchup that we're going to like. I broke it down on the board. Mike Denbrock will be able to do it. And so there's going to be others as well. They're going to have to figure that out. The other part, too, somebody just said they like to play 3 safeties a lot. That's not really part of the equation here because they have that position kind of solidified with Jordan Clark. That's a different conversation. I'm more talking about the back end, the back 2 safety. So you're correct, Joe, in that they do play 3 safeties a lot, although I think Mike Mickens would like to go to more of a 3-corner look as opposed to a 3 safety look. We'll talk about that another time. But that's more so the nickel spot. What we're talking about here is the 2 back-end guys, which is a very important part to this whole thing. They got to be able to figure that out. And so when I look at this defense, that's my biggest personnel question. Number 2 for me is actually not linebacker. I'll get to that in a minute. But the other focus that I have this spring is about the edge. You've got some big shoes to fill at the field end position. And you've got 2 completely different dynamics that Al Wash and Al Golden have to address this spring. The field position, it's about we got guys we like and that are talented, but they're having to replace departed players who are very productive. I've got to make sure that this group can step in and RJ, you got 2 guys learning the position to a degree. RJ Oben is coming in from Duke. He's played field end, but they used him a lot differently than Notre Dame uses their field end, so that's part of the conversation. Josh Burnham played a little bit of that last year, but he's primarily a Viper. He's got a lot to learn about that. He's going to be putting some weight on. You've got Bryce Young coming in. You've got some other young players. You've got to figure out how do I get this new look group to play like last year's group and hopefully better. So that's one of the question marks that he's going to have to figure out this year. And, here's the thing with Javonte Jean-Baptiste. Was he a great player last year? No. Is he irreplaceable? No. Can you replace his production? Yes. But here's the thing. I'm actually not overly concerned about whether or not Notre Dame can replace the production of the group from last year. Here's the thing about Javonte Jean-Baptiste to me that is why he was such an impactful player. He just seemed to be – his production came at times like when you needed it most. Man, you need to stop right here, man. You just got to – somebody's got to step up and make a play. And a lot of times it was Javonte. Or, man, you need to come out in this USC game and set that tone early. Well, who had the early pass rush that forced the sailed throw that resulted in Xavier Watts picking it off? Pretty sure it was Javonte. And so it wasn't just the numbers. I mean, 10.5 tackles for loss and 5 sacks. All right, great, fine. I mean, that's good production. That's a good year. But as I've said to you before, stats can be hollow. And I could point to guys that had 10 tackles for loss and 5 sacks and say, yeah, they weren't that great. But when you look at Javonte, it wasn't the production so much. It was the clutch manner in which he played the game and the dual threat nature. He was good against the run and good against the pass. So it's the production they can replace. No doubt that they'll replace the production. Can they replace the clutch way in which Javonte played the game? That's a completely different question. The potential's there, but they got to develop it. On the opposite side, completely different issue. You know who your guys are. It's the same guys that were basically there last year. It's Jordan Patejo, Junior Tuamaka, and Boubacar Traore. You had all three of those guys last year. The question there isn't who's going to play. You know the contenders. It's not, gee, they don't have experience. They do. The question is, can you get that group to play better? And look, if everybody on defense just plays the returners, just plays the same way they did last year, even RJ Oben and Josh Burnham just kind of give you what they gave you last year. And Rod Hurd just kind of does safety like he did nickel. And Christian Gray and Jaden Mickey just do what they did last year, right? Which is pretty good. If everybody does better as well as they did last year, take the Mike conversation out of this. Everywhere else, if everybody just does what they did last year, but Jordan Patejo and Junior Tuamaka and Boubacar Traore all step up and take their games to a higher level, they're going to be better on defense. Just by that, if that's the only big jump we see from anybody. Morrison's the same guy was last year. Xavier's same guy was last year. Kaiser, same guys last year. Riley Mills, Howard Carl, same guys last year. Jason Onye, same guys last year. If Patejo, Tuamaka, and or Traore all step up and play the way that we know they can, and they flashed at times, especially Jordan and Boubacar, then you're a much better defense because you'll have a legitimate pass rush at that position. And that's going to be a big key. And I've heard people make excuses for why Junior wasn't better last year. Oh, they didn't ask him to pass rush a lot. No, yes, they did. That's just not even remotely close to being accurate. They asked him, he absolutely was given plenty of chances to rush the quarterback last year. It was just about him not playing well. And he's going to have to play better if Notre Dame is going to have the kind of defense you need to play at an incredibly high level. Like, look, last year, Jordan Patejo had 227 pass rushes in 13 games. And he had 18 total pressures. That's it. If you project his total pressures and you give him the number of snaps that Isaiah Foskey had last year, he's still almost 10 pressures behind where Foskey was. He'd had 25 or 24 and a half, go one of the two ways, and Foskey had 33. Now, Foskey only played 12 games last year. And the other part of it is Junior wouldn't have had as many, Jordan wouldn't have had as much contact on the quarterback as you saw from Isaiah Foskey. And Isaiah Foskey wasn't even great last year. So to me, the fact is the success rate, whether you want to look at total numbers, per snap numbers, any of that stuff, wasn't nearly good enough compared to where it needs to be. And if you look at his numbers and you compare it to what Foskey was in 2021, which I felt Foskey was a better player in 2021, his production would have been a lot less. He would have only had 22 and a half tackles for total pressures compared to 32 for Foskey. So either way you slice it, he wasn't good enough. Can he be good enough? Yeah, he can. Jordan Patejo has shown he can take over games. He can be an impact player. Can he do it every week? Probably not. Can he do it more than he's done in the past? Absolutely. And so what Notre Dame needs from him is to be a steady player week to week, be steady, and then have some flashes in there. Now, here's the thing about Jordan. If you were to ask me what player has the potential to take over the clutch role that Javonte Jean-Baptiste had, I would actually say Jordan Patejo has the ability to be that guy. RJ Oben can, sure, Josh Burnham. But if you can get Jordan to be the guy that we know he can be, he could actually be that as well. And I'm looking forward to seeing that and to seeing what he's going to be able to do. So there's plenty of talent. It's just about, can you get the play where it needs to get to, and can you get it consistently? Next piece we've talked a lot about this spring. I don't need to rehash it a lot, but you're going to have to get the linebackers to grow up in a hurry. That's got to be a major focus for Al Golden and Max Bola this spring. Now the good news is you're going to give them a ton of reps. They're going to get a ton of reps because you only have, I think, 8 linebackers on the roster. Just as a fine number for a team who only plays a 3 linebacker defense only half the time. Last year, for example, the nickel played more than the rover last season from a snap standpoint. So it's really 2.5 positions. 8 people is plenty for that. get to 9 and feel comfortable, but eight's plenty. But you're not going to have Bodie Cahoon and you're not going to have Teddy Rizak this spring, which means a lot more reps for the other players. So the good news is they're going to get a ton of work. They're going to make lots of mistakes early on. You kind of accept that. That's part of the learning process. But the hope is that they can kind of grow up quickly, learn from those mistakes quickly, learn the defense, learn the checks, learn the calls, get the communication down, and start making more plays. Because I'll say this, Drake Bowen and Jalen Sneed or Jaden Ausberry, either one of those two guys, if they're the starters next year, they're not going to be as consistent as Marist and especially JD Bertrand were. But what they can do is potentially make more plays because they're just more explosive athletes. And to me, they have a little bit better feel for the game than Marist overall. Although there were certain areas where Marist would really flash. But there's potential to keep the thing rolling a linebacker. But the spring is going to be important for that, is really laying the foundation for that and putting in the extra work and saying, hey, this is a point of emphasis. We have to get this group ready to play. They have to step up. They have to be good. They have to get where they need to get to. That's going to be a big, big part of it. Here's the final piece. And here's really what's going to tell us. Like, as I start talking about things that need to improve, you had people say the run defense needs to get improved. I think Michael Park said that. He was right. The run defense has to get better. There's no doubt about that. You had somebody else chime in, and I'm going to find it. I'm going to find that Jimmy Page chimed in and talked about pass rush. Trainer Nick talked about sack production. Those are all fair things, and I would argue I would push back on the sack production. That's a whole different conversation. I've had this before. I don't care as much about sacks as other people do. I don't not care about them, but you could be a much better pass rushing team, and your sack production doesn't take a big jump. But the thought process that I think Trainer Nick has in making that comment is accurate. You need to be even more disruptive, especially consistently. All those things are true. But there's something at the heart of that is more important than just saying run defense. Because when I think run defense is about, okay, have the right calls, be better with your block destruction, be assignment correct, do all those type of things. That's fine. Pass rush, design more blitzes. But there's something at the heart of this that if it doesn't get fixed, I'll say fixed. It doesn't need to get fixed. It was good. But if there's one area on this defense that I think can get better, it's the physicality. And to me, that's at the heart of a lot of this. And one of the things that I thought about last year's defense is last year's defense, to me, was a big jump up from what it was in 2022. And especially a jump up from where it was in like 2021. For several years, the end of Clark Lee's tenure, it was true to a degree in Marcus Freeman's tenure, and it was true in the first year of Al Golden's tenure. One of my biggest concerns is that Notre Dame's defense stopped being a really physical defense. When you think back to the 2017 and 2018 teams, the thing that always popped out is you had guys that would hit. You were usually the more physical football team. I even think back to the 2020 team, which wasn't even super physical, but I remember watching the defensive line that year thinking, boy, they're really taking it to Alabama. They are fighting their butts off. And so, but that wasn't consistent enough. But I did think that 2020 team was one of the few Brian Kelly teams in his last 3 years that actually had some physicality to it. The 19 team didn't. The 2021 team certainly didn't. That was one of the, I don't want to say softest, but how do I say this without it? Because I've told you guys before, I hate the word soft. If I'm ever going to use it, it's meant to be it's like a sting. Like I'm really trying to challenge you. I don't mean, they just weren't physical. They just didn't have that edge. You started to see it a little bit last year, but even then, how many of the really wow, what a big hit that was. And you're not going to have as much of that as you used to because, I mean, you look at some hits from, I think I've told the story before, but I remember a few years ago, somebody put like a Sean Taylor highlight clip together on Twitter of all his big hits at Miami. And I was like, targeting. He'd have been kicked out of every game because of the new targeting rules. And to a degree, I like some of it. To others, I don't. But here's the deal. It's not so much. And somebody asked a good question. Michael Johnson said, "Is it because the linebackers are smaller?" No, it's not that, because it's not so much. Because I think one of the more physical players they had last year was JD Bertrand. It's not so much that you're delivering the punishing tackles like Manti had, or like Zeke Mata had, or like Harrison Smith had. It's not so much that. It's more of a. It's like, are you really playing the game with the utmost ferocity? Are you a team that really comes out and just, I'm going to try to kick your butt every single play? And to me, it's they didn't have enough of that, even on defense last year. I mean, you've got the moments where that was true. I thought the defense was as physical as I think you can be for the first, except for the last drive where they went away from, they went into prevent, did all that stuff. I thought they were very physical against Ohio State. There was tons of pads popping. I thought, and some other, I knew Duke to a degree, but there were other times when you're like, hey, man, this team's really playing physical football. NC State really playing physical football. But when you like to look at the Louisville game, the defense didn't play bad against Louisville. But did you watch that game and really think, man, this team's real physical today? When they played Clemson, did you come out of that game thinking, they didn't play great, but boy, they were physical that game? No, you didn't. It was, they're flying around, but this team just wasn't really. It's an attitude, it's a demeanor. Now, here's why I'm optimistic that this is going to get better, because you don't go from like 0 to 1,000, like 100, just like that. It's a building process, and Al Golden has got to build this into his football team, and you've got to be in a situation where you got to start somewhere, and I really feel like they started to get that more last year. Now you've got to take it to another level. You've got to get back to being, hey, again, there's part of it's like weight room strength, and part of it is getting bigger. Drake Bowen's going to be bigger than JD Bertrand and that type of thing. But it's also a lot of it's about just your attitude, your demeanor, your desire to just, I'm going to fight you every single snap. And I thought Javonte Jean-Baptiste is a guy that did play with that last year, which is why he won so much. But not enough guys did that. Now you're going into year 3 of Al Golden, Marcus Freeman tenure. I expect and hope we'll see another jump. So again, they laid the foundation last year. Now I want to see another jump. And the thing is, you're going to be a little bit bigger this year. Rod Hurd's going to be stronger than DJ Brown. Drake Bowen is bigger and has more natural power than JD Bertrand. But again, it's not so much about that. That helps, but it's about your demeanor, the way you play the game. Are you catching blocks, or are you delivering blocks? There were times last year, even Howard Cross and Riley Mills, as good as they were, would kind of come off and absorb contact instead of constantly delivering contact. It was a lot of that kind of stuff. And that's something that I think, if anything, that would be my biggest big picture focus if I'm looking at this defense. There's a lot of issues that got to get fixed on offense. Defensively, it's just, clean up this, develop this young talent, the guys here, make sure your stars are, still being stars and all that kind of stuff. You return 3 All-Americans from your defense. It's more so, can we take, and again, it's not that they were soft or weren't physical. It's just they weren't physical enough. Like, here's a perfect example. I watched Michigan on defense, and I don't think they're way bigger than Notre Dame. And they are kind of up the middle, but I don't think that. I think Notre Dame's D tackles were very good. I mean, they weren't bigger at safety than Notre Dame. They weren't necessarily that much bigger at linebacker than Notre Dame. And it really comes down to, like Junior Colson checked in at 6'2", 238 at the combine. Maris Leofau at the combine checks in at a little over 6'2" and about the same weight. I'm pulling up now. Yeah, 234, about the same weight. Maris is longer. But it's more so, you watch Junior Colson play, and then you watch Maris play. And Junior Colson plays with a level of physicality every single snap. Maris shows flashes of that. Did Michigan have stronger players? Maybe. Or is it more about they just play with a different type of demeanor, a different type of attitude? They wanted to punish you. Are we trying to make stops, or are we trying to make stops while physically dominating you? And I think that's the next step for Al Golden's defense. and I'm sure he wants to get there. I'd be surprised if he didn't want to get there because that's part of football. And again, this isn't about knockout blows. This isn't about safety coming across and you lay him out. This isn't about decleating a running back. I mean, those things will be manifestations of this. It's more about just we play harder than you every single snap. The 2012 defense was all about that. We're going to outfight you, out hit you, outwork you, out leverage you, and just out hustle you every single snap. Can this defense get there? They took a step there, but there's a long way to go. And to me, that's where I want to see this team get to. I want to see this linebacking core being more like Drew Tranquil and Tavon Coney, right? Just physical, take on blocks physical, arrive at the ball carry physical, get through the line physical. I want to see this D line play more, just more ferocity, more physicality. Those are things that I think are missing now. Okay, what does that mean? Well, I mean, it means you have a better attitude. And when I mean attitude, I don't mean like they had bad attitudes. It just means like just the attitude of your team, the attitude of your defense. You have a different attitude. You attack a different way. You wear teams down more. You're better in the fourth quarter especially because Notre Dame's got such great depth that they can just throw waves of people, waves. We got, we can play 5-6 D tackles, play 5-6 defensive ends, we play 5-6 linebackers, can play, 4 safeties, can play 4 corners, can play 2-3 nickels. They've got the kind of depth to do that over the course of a 16-game season. But it comes down to it's more of an attitude and a demeanor on how they play. Can they get to that point? That then does what? What does that mean? Okay, you have highlight reel hits. Again, no, it means we're better in the run game because we're forcing you to go back more. We're wearing your linemen down, which means we're going to get more tackles for loss as the game goes on. We're going to get more stops in the fourth quarter. It means that physicality can be the difference between you getting a pressure on the quarterback or you getting a hit on the quarterback. It's about finishing better at the ball carry. It means the 2-yard gains turn into -1s, right? The pressures, the hurries turn into hits on the quarterback. The pressures that result in incomplete passes result in hits on the quarterback, which result in interceptions because the ball floats up in the air, right? And then that does what? When you are smacking running backs, when you're smacking receivers, when you're just beating them up. I'm not talking about laying them out hits because you may get thrown out for targeting in that case. I'm talking about I am just physical off the line. I'm physical in my routes. I'm physical taking on blocks. I'm physical getting the football. After a while, team just gets like, man, I'm tired of getting hit. I'm tired of getting mentally you're just all right. I'm tapping out because I'm just tired of getting hit in the face. I don't want to get hit in the face no more. You know what I mean? And that's really what it comes down to. And that makes you what? Better. It makes your pass rush more effective. It makes your run defense better. It makes you get more negatives, right? More tackles for loss, more sacks, more batted passes, more interceptions, more fumble recoveries, right? Those are all aspects of a team that's got athleticism, that's got talent, that's coached well. Taking that next step attitude-wise is a lot of times the difference between you being a good defense or great defense. What was the biggest difference between the Notre Dame football team in 1988 between the football team that Notre Dame had in 1987? Well, look, it was basically the same guys, right? I mean, it was basically, your 87 team. Who'd you even lose off of that team? You lost Cedric Figaro. That's about it, right? It was the same players. Figaro, excuse me. Off the defense, you pretty much had the same guys coming back. You had Arnold Ali was a freshman, but for the most part, it's the same guys. They were better because another year in the system under Barry Alvarez meant they played. I'm talking about offense or defense. But the next year, they now had a better understanding of what Barry Alvarez wanted. The guys were a year older in the system and all those things that are true of this team. But you go back and watch film of that 88 team. You go back and watch film with a 93 team compared to the 92 team. The biggest difference on defense wasn't that they somehow had better players. It was those teams played with a different attitude. The 2012 Notre Dame team did not have the talent of the 2011 Notre Dame team on defense because you had the same players you had in 2011. Your only newcomers were Sheldon Day, Kavari Russell. You lost Harrison Smith. You lost Darius Fleming. You lost Robert Blanton. You lost Jamor Slaughter in the third game of the year. The difference is the 2012 team played with a different attitude. They were more physical. They were more hungry. They had more fight. They had more determination than the 2011 defense. So again, it's not so much talent, it's about attitude. And that's something that I'd like to see this team take another step on. And I think that they do, again, because last year was about learning the system and still learning what he wants and all that. That's now a little bit more established. You're a lot more experienced up front. Now it comes down to, can you raise how you play the game to a higher level of physicality and ferocity? If they do that, that's what I think it takes for this defense to take that next jump and go from being a really good defense that's a top 10 defense to a truly elite, dominate games week after week defense. If you look at the statistics, Notre Dame and Michigan were very close this season in a lot of statistics outside of run defense. Very similar. Notre Dame, I believe, averaged more tackles for loss per game. Notre Dame's scoring defense was very close to Michigan's defense this season. Michigan led the nation at 10.4. Notre Dame was at 15.9 against a harder schedule, if we're being honest. Michigan was first in the nation in yards allowed at 247. Notre Dame was fifth in 276. Michigan, ranked, Michigan ranked number 4 nationally in yards per play allowed, 428. Notre Dame was fifth at 444. There was a lot of areas where the Notre Dame and Michigan defense were very similar statistically. But when you watched them play, you could sense something different with Michigan. There was a greater consistency. They kind of brought it every week. They shut teams down every week. And you say, well, how are the numbers so close? It didn't feel like, I was explaining to a friend. He's like, well, Michigan had a much better defense than Notre Dame. Okay, how? He's like, well, they were better here. I'm like, well, statistically, that's not true. It really came down to feel. And what he was feeling was not an emotional reaction, as he watched Michigan and he saw a team that every single week was just going to be the toughest team on the field. Every single week. That was not always true for Notre Dame, even on defense. And so to me, both sides of the ball, because we're going to kind of talk about this on the offensive side. That's what it comes down to. Are you the most physical team on the field on this Saturday? Because here's what I believe wholeheartedly. Notre Dame is never going to be on the field this season, the regular season, where they are just out-athleted in that game. That I believe that about Florida State. I believe that about Louisville, Texas A&M, USC. There may be teams that have better athletes here, but Notre Dame's going to have better athletes in certain positions as well. They're not going to go into games and say, hey, they've got more skill than we have. Regular season, there's not going to be a game where you say, hey, boy, that coaching staff has just run circles around our coaching staff. Shouldn't be the case. What it's going to come down to is, are you getting the best version of Notre Dame physically every week? Because if you go back and watch the 88 games, and look, some of the old timers like myself and the other people in the chat, let the younger folks know. There were plenty of games in 1988 where Notre Dame didn't play well. They weren't sharp offensively, missing some throws, not running the ball like they should, giving up a couple big plays here and there. Didn't play lights out on defense the way that you think they should. But you know what they did every single week? That team played hard. They were always the most physical team on the field every single week. That was true of the 1993 team as well, except they got after the week after Florida State. But that team came out every week, and whether they played well or not, they were the most physical team on the field. When you combine that with the athletes that they had, because that was a very athletic Notre Dame team. Rocket Ismail, Ricky Waters, Mark Green, Pat Terrell, Todd Light. That was a very athletic football team. Michael Stonebreaker was a great athlete at linebacker. Stanson Magala was a great athlete. Yes, they had the athletes, but they were going to be the more physical team on the field. And that's why they were kryptonite for Miami. Because one of the most underrated aspects of those great Miami teams in the 80s is people think of the athletes. Miami had athletes. But you go back and look at the NFL draft, and you will watch games of Miami in the 80s. And the reason Miami beat Florida State so often in the 80s is because Florida State can match them athlete for athlete, but Miami was always more physical than Florida State. They could match Michigan's physicality. The thing that hurt them against Notre Dame is that Notre Dame was the only team that could play Miami and beat them up in the trenches. What was the other big game that Miami got smoked in? It was in 92 against Bama, because that Miami team went against a Bama team that had some dudes in the trenches, and Bama was able to hurt them there. Notre Dame could do that back in the 80s. They've got to get back to being that. And it's not about being the biggest. Chris Zorich was far from the biggest defensive lineman. I mean, if you go look at Notre Dame's offensive line or defensive line and the size of their D line compared to Miami's D line, they didn't have this massive D line like they kind of had in 2012. They played with an edge. Chris Zorich was undersized even for his era, but nobody was going to outwork him. Nobody's going to outfight him. If football was a street fight, Chris Zorich was undefeated, right? Because he was never going to lose the fight. And that's where I think there's a level that this team needs to get to. And it's not about being bigger, stronger. Yes, you want to maximize your strength program. And last year you kind of went through the season without a strength coach, really. That's not going to be the case this year. Stronger, yes. Endurance, yes. But it's an attitude thing, folks. That's what I'm getting to. It's an attitude. And if they can get that on defense, that to me is the missing link between them being a really good, top 10 defense and being an elite. This team, hey, you know what offense doesn't have today? No problem, because this team can't score on us anyway. So all you need to do, hey, guys, just get us a 20. Get us a 20, 24. We got this, okay? And that's the thing where Notre Dame is getting closer to that, but they're not there yet. And I think this part right here could be a big part of that. Be a really big part of that. And I'm looking forward to seeing that hopefully manifest in the spring and into the fall. So that's going to do it for the defensive breakdown. I'm going to get into a couple things next here about the ACC and Notre Dame. But before we do, folks, do me a favor, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. And as the people in the chat are telling you, you're missing out if you're not on the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Check it out. Final part of today's show is going to talk about the latest in the SEC and the anticipated demise of the ACC. I want to talk a little bit about that. And then we will get into a little bit about what that means for Notre Dame. And so to me, I look at it as, okay, let's just dive into the news here. Okay, let's just get to it. Latest with the ACC. What is the latest with the ACC? Florida State is already suing the ACC to basically get out of their grant of rights deal. Right now, they have a huge grant of rights contract. There's a buyout involved that's humongous. And for teams like Florida State and Clemson, they are struggling financially in their minds and in different areas where they think they should get more. Florida State's struggling more than Clemson, but Clemson thinks they can get more, want more, all these type of things. So Florida State sues the ACC to try to get out of the league. This was anticipated. Everybody kind of knew this was a matter of when, not if, but now Clemson has jumped into the lawsuit. And if you haven't had a chance to read it, it is hilarious. If we're going to be honest about it, it's hilarious. Like some of the things they're claiming are just nonsensical. And they know they're not going to get this. They're basically saying that the contract should be meaningless. It's essentially what they're saying. They're saying essentially that they shouldn't be able to enforce the grant of rights. They shouldn't be able to enforce the buyout, that Clemson should be able to leave the conference whenever they want at no cost whatsoever. Well, it's kind of like what the Big Ten and SEC did with the college football playoff. I don't think they ever actually thought they were going to get 4 automatic bids each. I don't think they ever thought that. Now, again, you go into negotiations, hey, I'm going to offer you, I can pay you, $50,000, but I'm going to offer you 30, because if you take 30, then I'm going to pay you 30, right? And say, hey, we're going to ask for 4 automatics, knowing that we'll settle for 2 or none or just 1 if we then get this thing. And I think that's exactly what the ploy was for the ACC or the SEC and the Big Ten. They played it masterfully. Florida State and especially Clemson, like Clemson does not think at all that they're going to win this ultimately. Win it from the standpoint of what they're asking for now. It's about setting an argument to then hopefully have something that's more agreeable for you in the future. So a few things that I want to discuss about this. Number one is the ACC as we know it is going to end soon. I will say this. I was talking with somebody today and it was a very eye-opening conversation, because one of the things to consider about this whole thing is it's not necessarily a given that the Florida State and Clemson want to leave the ACC outright. what there's a lot of posturing here is they don't like the current deal. They're locked into a pretty low number for another 11, 12, excuse me, 12 years, 2036. So even though it's not a bad deal now, it's going to get worse when the Big Ten and the SEC things kick in. But in 3, 4, 5 years, it's going to be way, way worse. And then by 2036, that 20 something million is going to be insanely low. So essentially, what they're trying to do is get out of this deal. So there's a couple different ways that they can go. Number one is they get out of the league and they go to other conferences. That's obviously an option. I don't know that either conference is necessary of the big conferences is necessarily chomping at the bit to get either one of these teams, because the misconception I think a lot of people have is that, well, just because you're the best football program, that you have this certain power, that you're the desired program. It's just not accurate. Do you think that the Big Ten felt, in order to make themselves a better conference on the field, that they needed USC and UCLA? No. They wanted what? The TV market. That's what they wanted. You hear about the Big Ten. We've heard rumors about the Big Ten wanting North Carolina and Virginia. Why? Is it about the quality of their programs? No. It's about the markets. They're big markets. They want the DC, Maryland, Virginia market. They want the Carolina market. The reality is Florida State is not even the biggest prize in the state of Florida for the SEC or the Big Ten. Miami is. And so Florida State is not a team that necessarily be desired. Now, that doesn't mean that they won't be able to find a home. They should probably find a home. Clemson, same thing. Clemson's problem is they're going to get out. And the best part of their whole thing is them saying, hey, we're not asking out of the league. We just want to have the ability to get out of the league whenever we want. That was the best part of the absolutely absurd filing that they had today. But ultimately, what it comes down to is because ESPN has the option of, and this has been talked about by some other people. I know Josh Pate's talked about this, and it's been talked about in a couple shows. ESPN has the ability to get out of the ACC deal in 2025. And right now, the ACC or ESPN, there's no motivation for the ESPN to give them a bigger deal. None. Because the league is, I mean, they're locked in. Like, you're going to save that much money and have that big conference, basketball, all these different sports to play. And this is something that was brought to my attention today. Is think about the programming that ESPN would lose if the ACC went away. Think about that. So, because I've always thought, like, I don't think ESPN really wants the ACC. I felt that for a while. And I've had some people pointed out to me that, like, no, they do, and especially the cheap deal that they have. Makes some sense. Well, if you're the ACC teams, you want to get out because you don't want to be stuck in that deal. The ACC conference is not going to let teams out, because then, you know, who knows what happens. So essentially, here's a couple things that needs to happen. If Florida State and Clemson both get out of the ACC doesn't go away. The ACC will still be a thing. The concern, if you're the ACC, is if they're able to legally sue themselves out of the league, then that opens up the avenue that other programs would need to get out. So one of two things would happen. Number one is the ACC goes away, and the Big Ten and the SEC poach the programs that are worth money in the ACC. It's North Carolina, it's Virginia, it's Notre Dame, it's Miami. Florida State and Clemson are part of that. Georgia Tech, to a degree, would be part of that, especially for the Big Ten. But what a lot of people don't realize is Florida State and Clemson are great programs, but they are not financial money movers when it comes to these leagues. That's why the Big Ten would – I'd be willing to bet you $100 that if you could get a Big Ten person to be able to speak freely, the leadership, that they would say they'd rather have North Carolina or Virginia than Florida State. Now, I'm not the only person saying this. There's a lot of other people saying this because, again, it's not about adding the best programs. They don't need to add Florida State as a program. It's about, are we adding markets that are going to make us stronger as a conference? Number one. Number two, and I said this to somebody today, I'd be willing to bet you that if the Big Ten had a choice, we want a school in Florida. I'd be willing to bet you if the Big Ten had their pick of schools, they'd rather have Miami. They'd rather have that South Florida market, and they'd rather have a school that actually has a strong reputation academically, something Florida State does not. Miami does. It would fit very much in line with what the Big Ten thinks they are academically. And I'm not saying that they aren't. I mean, the Big Ten, in a weird way, still takes pride in their academic prestige, even though, there's things that, we don't need to get into that. But they do take pride in that. That's why they won Notre Dame. That's why they want Virginia. That's why they want North Carolina. And that's why they're not in love with Florida State. Now, would they take Florida State? Probably. But Florida State could end up kind of hurting themselves. But here's the other thing. Let's say they get out, and then Clemson gets out, and immediately the lawsuits are settled. Here's the path out. Here's what it's going to cost. And all of a sudden, you're going to see a lot of these teams kind of jump out of that deal. Because what I believe is that they don't necessarily want to not be in the ACC anymore. They don't want to be in that media contract anymore. So then ESPN says, okay, are we going to still pay the same amount for this league that no longer has the same value because Florida State's out, Clemson's out? And here's the problem. For ESPN, if they lose those two teams, Florida State and Clemson, and then let's say North Carolina and Virginia jump out, here's the reality. There's a better chance all four of those teams go to the Big Ten than they go to the SEC. And so what does that matter to ESPN? That means they don't have those markets anymore, or at least a chunk of those markets anymore, because now Fox has the Carolinas. What's the draw for ESPN in the East Coast? What's like now, if this happens, now ESPN becomes a Southern network because they don't have the Big Ten. They don't have the ACC top team markets anymore. They don't have Notre Dame. So they're a regional program, right? And so I don't think they want that. The thought would be maybe that could be something that gets ESPN to say, we're going to get out of this contract in 2025, and we want to try. We have a desire to keep this conference together, and we're going to go about it this way. Now, if ESPN could take the top 6 markets in the ACC and then take them to the SEC, I think they'd want that. I actually personally, I have some people disagree with me. I think if ESPN knew they could get Florida State, Clemson, Virginia, North Carolina, Miami, and Georgia Tech, and get those teams to stay in the SEC, and then the rest of the ACC goes away, I think they'd take that deal, because then they could still have those markets, but now they're only having to pay 6 of those teams at a higher mark as opposed to 15 of those teams. But that's a different conversation for a different day. So there's a couple things at play here. One is the potential demise of the ACC. The other is that enough teams leave that before they find homes, ESPN kind of says, hey, we got to go back to the drawing table because we've got to do our part to make sure this thing stays together. Otherwise, we're going to lose a big chunk of this. That's part of it too. There's a lot of uncertainty there about what's going to happen next, but certainly it doesn't look good for the ACC right now. If I had to bet, I would say that most likely if those teams got out, they would get out and go somewhere else. Most likely. So what does that mean for Notre Dame? Here is what makes me laugh. Whenever something like this happens, the first reaction from a handful of Notre Dame fans, and I don't know what the percentage is, whether it's small, big, or large, I don't know, but I know it's very loud, is, man, Notre Dame's have to join the Big Ten now. Notre Dame's have to join, because now that the ACC's gone, where are they going to, guys and gals, listen. Notre Dame is, listen to me. I want you all to hear me say this. Notre Dame is better positioned now to stay independent than they ever have been. Ever have been. You're talking about a situation now, number one. Do you guys really think that there's not a conference out there for the Olympic sports for the Notre Dame to go to that's not Big Ten, SEC, or the Big 12? There are. It's called the Big East. It's called the AAC. There are other conferences that Notre Dame would be able to send their Olympic sports and still keep their football team independent. Football team independent is priority number one. There will be a home for those leagues. Think about this. If you're the AAC or the Big East, you get a chance to get Notre Dame and some of the other ACC programs should the ACC disband. All of a sudden, the Big East kind of comes back as a thing. not football wise, but it comes back in those other sports. So you can make some more money off those sports. Number one. Number two, with like the AAC teams, you don't think the AAC teams say, we'll play you 2-3 times a year, and we'll sign a contract. As long as you play us 2-3 times a year, we'll gladly take that. Well, you already got one of those out of the way because you've already played Navy. And so Notre Dame, in that regard, would have no problem finding a landing spot for their Olympic sports. Simple as that. Just get that out of your head right now. They don't need the power of 3 that would be remaining for their Olympic sports. They don't need it. Right? Why don't they need it? Because the football team doesn't need to be in a conference. And there's this notion that Notre Dame's going to be forced to do a conference. Well, listen, there's announced today the new playoff deal is signed. The things that would have to happen to blow that up are astronomical and are still a long ways away. So Notre Dame just signed a new apparel deal that my understanding is going to make them the number 1 apparel deal in the country. They just signed a new extension with ESPN. And there's a couple things to think about that. I asked somebody today, I said, I've been told it's around $50 million. Is that, and it's in the ballpark. And my understanding, based on now about 3 conversations I've had, I actually believe it's a little more than that, but it's in the ballpark. So you've got that, plus you got the ACC deal. You were making around $30 million on TV deals last year. When this extension goes into effect, you're going to be making minimum 65. You've easily more than doubled your TV revenue. Easily doubled it. You also have a situation now where Notre Dame is going to make a lot more money in this new deal with the playoff than they were making before. Guys, keep something in mind. When the old playoff system was paying out $460 million annually, the new playoff deal is paying out $1.3 billion annually. And so while the ACC is getting a smaller cut of that, it's still more money than they were previously making. Some things I've been told, and I don't know the particulars, so I won't dive into it too much, but Notre Dame is guaranteed the number that they're going to make. But when Notre Dame actually makes the playoff, they get more than they get because like the way it works is if Notre Dame is the 13 team and they don't make the playoff this year, they still get paid whatever, it's like $12-13 million. Right? It's I think slightly above what the ACC's cut is, or right around what the ACC's cut is when we did the math last week. But if they make it, they get more. And so right now, Notre Dame is in a position with the new TV deal, and because they signed in, here's another thing that you have to think about. By signing an extension and not a brand new 10 to 15-year deal, that means Notre Dame in 5 years is going to be on the market again. Now, the unique thing about being on the market this time is it was around the same time that the Big Ten was looking for new deals and the SEC got new deals. In the last 2 years, the 2 power conferences have signed new deals. The Big 12 has signed a new deal. In 5 years, when Notre Dame's a free agent again, basically, or about to be a free agent, there's nobody else's contracts going to be coming up. So Notre Dame would then be the prize for everybody. So yes, your extension is what it is now, but you're going to be up for your contract well before the SEC and the Big Ten are going to be up for theirs. That's some posturing that is smart, what makes us smart. So you're getting a big push for the next 5 years, but then you're going to get even bigger push and at that point in time after that extension comes up. So folks, again, right now, Notre Dame is as positioned as they've ever been because the new CFB playoff deal, I think, is going to be for 5 or 6 years, which means there's 2 years left of the current deal and a minimum 5 years for that. So you're looking at 7 years where Notre Dame is contractually in a position where they can't be kept out of the playoff unless the product on the field isn't good enough. My understanding is that they haven't locked in all the guarantees and all those type of things, but I do believe there's going to be some sort of guarantee for Notre Dame, whether it's top 14, top 10, where as long as they're here, they're going to be in. So the only thing that's going to keep Notre Dame out of the playoff right now is that they aren't good enough. That's That's what the New Deal did. The New Deal, if you're paying attention to what's happening and what Notre Dame says, and you actually ignore what ESPN people say and national people say, who really have never understood Notre Dame's position, you'll actually come away with this saying Notre Dame is in a great place. And I've said this to you guys a million times. Neither the Big Ten nor the SEC have any interest in trying to bully Notre Dame into their conference, because they both know the conference that bullies Notre Dame is going to be the conference that doesn't get Notre Dame. If the Big Ten tried to bully Notre Dame into joining one of the Big Two, Notre Dame would give them the middle finger and join the SEC. If they had to join a conference, if the SEC tried to bully Notre Dame into their league, they'd give them two middle fingers and they'd go join the Big Ten. That's a fact. So Jack Swarbrick has said what? He's been very clear. What are the three things that are need to be there for Notre Dame to be able to stay independent? Number one, a path to a championship. Well, with this new contract for the new college football playoff deal, Notre Dame's got that. They're not going to keep Notre Dame out. Number one. Number two, they have to have a home for their Olympic sports. If the ACC goes away tomorrow, Notre Dame will have no problem. It'll be about which conference do we want, not do we have to join the Big Ten. I'm telling you right now. Now, that doesn't mean Notre Dame won't join the Big Ten, but it would only join the Big Ten with its Olympic sports. If the Big Ten wants Notre Dame, if the SEC wants Notre Dame, they will have to say, fine, we'll sign. You can have our Olympic sports, but you've got to play us 5 games a year like they have with the ACC. That's it. Because if they won't do that, then Notre Dame will easily go to the Big East. They'll easily go to the AAC before they'll do the other one. I promise you that. Okay. The number 3 thing, Notre Dame doesn't need to be in a Power 5 with their Olympic sports if things go crazy. They don't, because they would rather their Olympic sports. Now, this is my opinion based on conversations. It's not a fact, but I'm pretty sure I'm right on this. They would rather be in a smaller conference with their Olympic sports and be independent in football than have to be in a Power 3 or 2 conference and lose their independence in football. I believe that based on my feeling, but also some things I've been told in the past. I believe that to be true. And then the third thing is they'd have to have a deal, like a be on TV. Well, we saw this last time that Notre Dame has no problem getting teams to there was a push for Notre Dame from the different TV deals. And that was with them also negotiating with the Big Ten and the SEC. When Notre Dame becomes a free agent again, and when the 5-year extension is over, they will be the only game in town as far as looking for deals. They're in great position, folks. So people at ESPN are going to tell you one thing. People on podcasts are going to tell you another thing. They're all going to tell you this is going to be the thing that forces Notre Dame to join a conference. It's not happening. Notre Dame is in a beautiful financial place right now. They're going to way more than double their TV revenue starting next year. They're going to have a bigger apparel deal. There's all types of things in the works at Notre Dame. We've already seen a bunch of it, the basketball facilities, what they're doing with the Notre Dame football coaching staff. Guys, they are rolling in money athletic-wise compared to where they were a year ago. So Notre Dame was, like I said, making about 30 in TV deals this past year. They're going to way more than double that. Why would they then feel that they have to? If Notre Dame was okay taking 15 to 18 million from NBC and then 13 to 15 million from the ACC, and they were fine with that, why would they then all of a sudden feel the need to join a conference to make 15 or 20 more when they're going to more than double what they're already making? It just doesn't make any sense no matter what people tell you. They have a path to the playoff. No problem. And if the ACC goes away, it's not Big Ten or SEC, and that's it. I'm telling you, that's not it. So when all these people tell you that what's happening with the ACC is going to impact Notre Dame, the only way it impacts Notre Dame is twofold. If the ACC goes away, it's going to mess up Notre Dame's scheduling for football to a degree. Means that contract is gone. But number one. Number two, they can easily schedule Pitt, Syracuse, Boston College, Duke, Florida, those. They can still schedule all those teams, but then they'll just go back to playing more big teams in the Big Ten teams in non-conference. And if the Big Ten teams say, hey, we're not going to play you, then they're fine. They'll go play Big 12 teams, SEC teams, whatever. That's not going to be a problem. They'll find a home for their Olympic sports. They'll be fine. They'll be able to get the football schedule out. And you don't need to play the same kind of gauntlet that you've had in the past if you don't need to, because you just got to be in the top 14 moving forward. So there's really nothing that has happened in the last 6 months that in any way. I'm gonna stop right here. I want you guys to hear me. Okay, hear me on this, because this is what you need to understand. Everything in the last 6 months is being portrayed by national media and fans as pushing Notre Dame closer and closer and closer to having to join a conference. Okay. I'm going to tell you guys something right now, and I believe I'm right on this. The reason you need to stop listening to those people is because they don't know Notre Dame. They don't know what's going on at Notre Dame. I'm telling you folks right now, everything that has happened in the last 6 months is making Notre Dame more and more and more firm in their independence. I'm not saying Notre Dame will never join a conference. But what I'm telling you right now is if Notre Dame decides to join a conference, it will because they want to, not because they have to. Everything that has happened in the last 6 months to a year, new apparel deal, TV extension, new contract for the college football playoff, all of it has been very pro Notre Dame. The fact that we have a new college football playoff format with Notre Dame getting guarantees that pays it more than it did before and guarantees Notre Dame a spot in that playoff, a path to a championship, is everything you need to know about what the future holds for Notre Dame. Notre Dame does not have to join a conference if the ACC goes away. They do not have to join the Big Ten or the SEC if the ACC goes away. They don't. Notre Dame is better positioned now for independence than they have been in several years. And that's what you guys need to understand. Stop listening to what ESPN tells you about this stuff. They don't know Notre Dame. They have an agenda. Notre Dame is in a great place. I don't want to see the ACC go away. I think the ACC being a thing I think Notre Dame is a great fit in the ACC. I like Notre Dame in the ACC. There's recruiting advantages to it. There's more like-minded institutions. All those things are true. I hope the ACC can figure this out. I hope that they can do something if these two teams leave, as long as they keep the Carolinas and Virginia and Miami and teams like that. I think the ACC can survive this. I do. Maybe they can add a couple teams. Go look at the AAC and maybe add a couple teams. So I think that they can survive this. It's going to be tough, but I think they can survive it. I hope that they can figure something out to keep Florida State and Clemson in the ACC. I do. I hope that they're able to figure that out. But at the end of the day, if the ACC does go away, it certainly impacts Notre Dame because they've got to find a new home for their for their Olympic sports. But I'm telling you guys, it will have no bearing, as far as I know, as far as some crazy stuff happening otherwise, it will have no bearing on what Notre Dame does next as far as their football program. It affects their Olympic sports. It'll affect some scheduling things for the football team. But Notre Dame is as well positioned now with what's going on in the last year. I mean, think about it. I'm going to say it again. You just signed a new DV deal extension that's going to pay you more than double what you were making before. You just got a new apparel deal that's going to make you number one or number two in all of college sports in the size of that apparel deal. You're going to start making a lot more money in the new playoff system than you did before. You're already going to make it in the 12, you're going to make more, but in the 14, you're going to make even more. And if they make the playoff, which there's a greater chance they do, because think about it, they've had 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21 to do. They've had 10 playoffs so far. Notre Dame's made 2. The odds of Notre Dame doubling or tripling that over the next 10 years in a 12 to 14 team playoff greatly is enhanced, which means they'll be making even more money. So Notre Dame has significantly doubled, close to tripled the revenue that their football program is going to be producing. Why would they then feel bullied into a conference? They're not going to be. That's just a fact. They're not going to be, because the path to a championship with this new deal that's been signed was agreed to this last week. I believe it may have been announced during the show, maybe before the show. I haven't seen it yet, but it's going to probably be announced today or tomorrow. Garrett means that for the next minimum 7 years, Notre Dame has a path to a championship, which means we should just kind of go la, 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 whenever fans of other teams are trying to convince you that Notre Dame has to join a league. They don't. If the ACC goes away, they will find a new home for the Olympic sports. It may be the Big Ten. It may be the SEC. It may be the Big East. It may be the AAC. But what it won't be is the football team becoming a full-time member. It won't be. And so that's my belief. That's something I think Notre Dame fans need to understand, that Notre Dame is actually in a great – stop letting other people like that aren't part of the Notre Dame network or aren't part of the negotiations tell you what you should be thinking about what Notre Dame or what's really going on in Notre Dame. Notre Dame is in a great, great position right now. Moving forward, the position they're in now compared to a year ago, exponentially stronger and richer. And that's where Notre Dame is at. Did get a couple quick super chats that I want to get to before we get out of here. Michael S. said Ohio State head coach Ryan Day said today that he has the best running back room in the country. Is he right? Your thoughts? They're in the conversation. I mean, if I had to go off past production, I'd say probably. I mean, they've got two guys that have rushed for 1,000 yards in their career. Not a lot of teams can say they do that. The Penn State group, I think, is in the conversation as well. They weren't as good last year, in my opinion, but I think the Penn State group is very talented as well. But Ohio State is a 1-2 punch, certainly is in position to say that they have the best running back room in college football. So if I was doing a preseason ranking, I'm just trying to think off the top of my head, I'd probably rank Ohio State number 1. But a big part of that is, is Travion Henderson going to be healthy, and can he stay healthy? I think Quinshon Judkins is a good running back, but I don't think he is the player that he's made out to be, in my opinion. He's a good back, but he's not an elite back. And he is what people thought Mayan Williams was. Kid averaged 4.3 yards per carry last year. That's it. I mean, he had a couple good games in the middle of the year, but think about this. This is Quinshon Judkins' yards per carry in his games last year. 4.6, 2.7, 2.9, 4.3, 5.4, 3.6, 5.9, 7.3 against Vandy. 4.4, 3.4, 3.6, 4.3, 3.1. So last year, Quinshon Judkins had 3 games where he was over 5 yards per carry. 3 games. So, no, I'm not. I mean, it's not, oh my gosh, it's an insane room the way the people are making it out to be. But is it probably the number 1 room in the country right now? Yeah, I would say so. Do I think it'll be the number 1 room by the end of the year? No, I don't. But they'll be top 2 or 3. I mean, that's a really good room. I think it's getting a little bit too much hype for how good it is, but that's still a really good room. And so I would probably rank it number 1 right now. I mean, for him to be talking about it, whatever. I don't care what Ryan Day says. He's a clown. But in this particular case, he would be correct in that. And then last super chat from Jimmy Page. Thank you, Jimmy. And thank you, Michael S., for yours as well. But Jimmy Page, great show as always, BD. Who's second QB at Texas A&M? I believe they've got a battle for that. I believe it's going to be the kid that finished the year at quarterback, the kid that started against LSU. Is it Jalen Henderson? Be him. He's going to be battling for it. I believe Marcel Reed is still there, but I would imagine Jalen Henderson is your number 2 quarterback. He did some nice things. He played well against LSU at the end of the year. I thought he did some nice things in that game, but he'd probably be it. Yeah, 2 for 294 yards, 2 touchdowns and a pick. So I would assume it'd be him. He'd be the guy that would get that opportunity. So who started for them in the bowl game? Do you guys remember? Was it Marcel Reed that started in the bowl game? Yeah, I think Marcel Reed. He played pretty well in the bowl game too. So I don't think Marcel Reed transferred this offseason. Let me just look this up real quick. But I think Marcel Reed is still there on the football team. Give me 1 second. I'm going to look this up. Let's see. There's the coaching staff. I want the players, not the coaches. These new roster menus are absolutely a train wreck. I cannot stand them. They never load. It's hard to get an actual just printed out roster. So let me see here. Marcel Reed, Texas A&M. I don't think he is transferred. I think he's still at Texas A&M. So that would be the battle. But I would imagine Jalen Henderson has the advantage right now, experience wise. So we'll see. He'll say that. And then Jimmy just followed up. He said, Notre Dame, BD. Who's going to be number 2 today? I don't know. I mean, we've talked about this a lot on shows, Jimmy. Steve Angeli. If I had to pick today, it's Steve Angeli because he's the number 2 today. That's what I'd pick today. Do I think he'll be number 2 by the end of spring? Maybe. Do I think he'll be number 2 by the time we get to Texas A&M? I don't know. He'll have a shot. But I don't know who that's going to be. I can say what I hope. I hope it's not Steve Angeli because I think Steve's a great kid, but he's just, to me, the 4th most talented quarterback on the roster. And you would hope that one of the younger players would kind of step up and be there. So it'll be interesting to see. But it's going to be a fun battle. And the reality is, whoever wins it, Jimmy, I'm comfortable. Like if Steve Angeli is good enough, if there's a real battle and Steve Angeli is good enough to hold off Kenny Minchie and Steve and CJ Carr, then I'll be like, as long as it's a real battle, I'll be like, look, he's better than I thought he was going to be. And maybe the guy we saw against Oregon State's the guy we're going to see often because he's going to have to be pretty good to hold off those guys. And so I'm confident whoever wins that battle is going to be a good football player. And again, as long as the battle's real, like the only time I've ever had a problem in the past with quarterback battles is when I really felt like the guy that was the better player didn't win it. Like we were at a lot of practices in the fall of 2016. Malik Zaire was better than Deshaun Kaiser, and I remember everybody would I'd take crap like I always did whenever I give opinion. Other writers talk about me behind my back, and fans say this and Deshaun Kaiser. Look, Deshaun Kaiser was not better than Malik Zaire in fall camp of 2016. He just wasn't. I was there every practice we were available to see, and we saw a bunch of them that spring. He was not the better player. And then when you combine the fact he wasn't a leader, it just like he was not the best option to quarterback that year. And the offense should not have been built around Deshaun Kaiser, in my opinion. That was a job where Brian Kelly rigged the game that year for Deshaun Kaiser. That's not a real battle. A real battle is, okay, two guys going at it, best man wins. The guy that performs best in practice in the scrimmage situation, the guy that gives the best chance to win, boom. If that's what happens, a real battle, and Steve Angeli wins it, they'll be fine. Because for him to beat out CJ Carr and Kenny Minchie, he's got to be pretty good. And if he doesn't get it and somebody else beats him out, then they'll be good. Because Steve Angeli's not going to go down without a fight. So if you're good enough to pass him up, then you're going to be pretty good. So that's why I just don't spend a lot of time on it, because right now it's everybody's opinion. We'll see what happens. We don't even know if it's going to be a real battle. I think it will be. I don't know why it wouldn't be. But let's see how it plays out. Who would it be right now? I can only tell you who it is today. And today it's Steve Angeli. Let's see who it is by April 20th. And then let's see it again who it is by the end of August. But I'm confident in it no matter how it goes, Jimmy. So I appreciate the super chat very much. That's going to do it for today, everybody. Hope you all enjoyed the show today. I will be back tomorrow for another episode of the Irish Breakdown podcast. I'm looking forward to that. Have a show on Thursday as well. And then Friday this week will be mailbag. So we had to switch it since Sean and Ryan did the recruiting. We wanted to do the Pot of Gold recap earlier in the week and not wait till Friday. So they did that yesterday. So we didn't have a mailbag yesterday. So we will have a mailbag on Friday. I'm very, very much looking forward to that. So before you go out, folks, hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. And if you have not done so, I promise you, folks, you are missing out. Check out the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. You get discounts at the merch store, great rates, great community, and intel that I think is very good. It's going to get better this summer, but the breakdowns is something that you're really going to want to see. I did a small sample yesterday. Going to have a lot more coming. We're going to do a lot more of that type of stuff during the season. It's a lot of fun. And everybody in the chat that's on the board will tell you you're missing out if you're not on there. So definitely check that out. So have an awesome rest of your day, everybody. Thank you so much for being with me. And I'm about 2 weeks away right now. I talked to the people that are fixing our house. They said April 1st is the final day for cleanup. So hopefully that first week of April, I'll be able to finally get back to my office and get that all set up. So I'm looking forward to that. Not looking forward to having to repack the house or reload the house because all the stuff right now is in the garage and in pods. That's not going to be a lot of fun. But I am very much looking forward to getting my office back. Very much. So have an awesome day, everybody. Talk to you again very soon on the Irish Breakdown podcast.